I am a research scientist with a company that I can't name for fear of them finding me. All names below are fictitious for privacy reasons. A few years ago around Christmas, our Explorer satellite system found strange energy readings in the Arctic Circle. Our team and our military escorts were forced to brave life-threatening blizzards to find the energy source. We were near it when our scout radioed a fast object was headed our way. The military took no chances and fired on the object before we could see it through the heavy snow. There was a loud bang and pieces fell from it as it veered off and disappeared into the storm. The pieces that we found were strange. Wood painted red, toys of all kinds, and a leather-covered book. The book's cover was warm. Its thin, flexible pages were like metal. A pen-like metal cylinder was attached to the cover. Nate, a team scientist, turned the pen over in his hand, wondering how to use it. He stood statue still for a moment, staring at the pen, before screaming bloody murder. He dropped the pen and then passed out. His expression was of sheer agony. I ran over immediately. One of his fingers had been cut off and cauterized so no blood was lost, but we were a long way from the base. It would be several hours before we could attempt to reattach it. I screamed for John to pack it in snow, place it in a specimen bag, and seal it. With luck, the cold would slow decomposition until the doctor could check it out. While John was busy, I examined the pen in the book. Had Nate activated a blade that sliced off his finger? Picking the pen up carefully, I opened the book to an empty page. I placed the pen on the metal surface, being sure the other end was pointed away from me in case that I had it wrong. I made a mark with the pen. It left a neat line similar to a quill pen, with a faint trail of smoke from the metal. Astounded, I put the pen back in its holder, while the rest of the team packed all the wreckage up. Finished, we headed back to our campsite. We planned to get a medivac on site at the camp and hopefully save the guy's finger. What should have been an hour return trip became 2 hours of plodding through bitterly cold, featureless terrain combined with a blinding blizzard. When we made it into camp, we headed to the food tent to refuel and warm up in the company of those sharing the cold misery of this place. Our medic, Jake, took Nate and his finger to the medical tent in hopes that the medivac could get to us in this weather. I took the mysterious book to the food tent. I grabbed some pork chops, pinto beans, and a roll from the food line, and headed to a corner so I could look through this strange find. The first thing I noticed was how light the book was, and how the pages were flexible, though it was a metal of some sort. But the most interesting part was what was on the pages. It took a while, but thanks to my Oma, bless her heart, I saw this was Old German. At first, I struggled, but as my memories of her lessons came back to me, I could read the writing. On the inside cover was a name. This journal is the property and story of Nick Claus. May the one who reads it be enlightened. The 18th of June, in the year of our Lord, 1866. Tobias came to see me today. He wants me to join him on an expedition to the Arctic. His boss wants to be the first German expedition to make it to the Arctic Circle, before Carl Coldaway's expedition next year. It has only been a year since some manic cut my poor Beth to ribbons while I was on another scientific journey. How can I go when she is no longer with me? My brother always gets what he wants, and this time will be no different. He swears this expedition is what I need to live again. Beth, how can I ever live again without you? The 29th of June, in the year of our Lord, 1866. Here we are at last. After all the preparation and hard work, we are on our way. We sail on the Argona Marie. It is a fine ship, with steam and sail power, so we should never be dead in the water during our trip. On our first morning of the trip, Tobias is up early. He is the first on deck from our team to keep himself busy with gear and helping the crew with chores. Hard work keeps boredom at bay on the trip to the Arctic Circle. I hate admitting that my brother was right, but it is good to be away from the tinker shop. No longer hiding in a house of memories and out in the world making new ones. I hope Beth is happy that I'm trying to live again. The 3rd of August in the year of our Lord, 1866. Tragedy. Our trip was marred by tragedy today. Jason Moria, one of the crew, has disappeared. No one saw him after his night watch had ended. I saw him last having an intense conversation with my brother, but Tobias said they discussed some cargo misplaced and found later in that day. Jason was experienced. It is hard to imagine that he fell off the ship. Strange lights were seen in the sky with an incredible aurora borealis display continuing until daylight. Beth, I hope you're watching over us from our Lord's domain. Rohan Petrov interrupted my reading. Chris, the samples from today. Yes, Rohan. I hoped you would hurry. I needed to keep reading this history, recorded on something from the future. We can't run any tests on them. I don't know how the military damaged it, never mind what it all is. We can't cut the sample. It isn't wood. He checked his clipboard for notes. You could get the toys at any store. There's nothing unusual to them. But every time we try to scan or cut a piece of not wood, the camp guards report lights in the sky. You mean we were followed? I tried to focus on Rohan, but the open book called to me. Don't tell me you think the sample is calling the UFO to us. I'm just reporting our observations. His face turned red. I guess I had punched a button, suggesting he wasn't being rational. The military is jumpy. They even tried to shoot at the helo as it landed. They blame the snow for low visibility. Okay, tell them to be more careful. Keep the wild theories between us until the data is verified. Again, my eyes were drawn to the open journal. It was calling to me to keep reading. Keep me informed and keep everyone calm. I'm deciphering the book right now, and interruptions don't help. Okay, Chris, sorry to interrupt your research. Rohan was pissed at being dismissed, but I had no time for crazy theories. Deciphering this journal could tell us when and what countries first came to the Arctic. I dove back into the journal. The 5th of August in the year of our Lord, 1866. My journal keeping has been erratic these days. My daily watching for new animals on the ice sheets, fishing, and being a lookout for icebergs keeps me busy all day. The aurora borealis is brighter than we have seen yet. There were lights in the sky again too. More of them than before when Jason went missing. Some of the lights came near the ship and went below the surface of the ocean. The crew is spooked and wants to turn back, but Captain Jericho is keeping them in line for now. Tobias seems fearful of the lights. He will not talk and gets angry if I attempt to discuss it. Beth could always get him to talk when he was like this. The 1st of September in the year of our Lord, 1866. The ice is thicker. We are not sure how far we can go before we turn back. If we get stuck in the ice, we could be crushed. The cold is painful, which limits how long we can be on deck and not suffer from frostbite. In the depths of the ship, with our boilers and stoves running as hot as we can push them, warmth still eludes us. Our heavy clothing weighs on our bodies and our spirits, causing emotions to run high. The episodes of malaise are affecting many of us. I worry about Tobias. Beth, I still miss you. The 15th of September, in the year of our Lord, 1866. We lost another man. This time someone else was on deck and saw a shadow run behind Nordric and stab him. Nordric was a blind giant descended from Vikings. He was a rough soul and seemed to enjoy run-ins with the others on board. These fights were becoming more frequent as everyone is on edge from the visit by the lights. Somebody had stabbed him and used the falling snow and strange shifting lights to hide him as they pushed him over and then disappeared. Everyone is panicking and pointing fingers at each other. Tobias believes it is the person that has been whispering mutiny. We are pushing hard against the ice floe now, and it is slow going. This death is not helping keep the men in line. Beth, what have I gotten myself into? The 3rd of October, in the year of our Lord, 1866. Mutiny. After a brief skirmish, our men and loyal crew were able to retake the ship. 3 of the mutineers were killed, and we lost George, one of our botanists. He will be missed. He was a good man. The captain has set them adrift as bait for the lights, so we can get a closer look. Tobias is livid. I've never seen him so mad. I hope that he can get control. I killed a man, Beth. Are you upset with me? An explosion pulled me to the present. I marked my place in the journal and jammed it in my pocket, got into my Arctic wear, and ran outside. Major Johnson ran towards me, backlit by roaring flames where the helipad markers used to be. It looked like the remains of a snowcat within the inferno. Sir, he nodded, I guess you heard the latest run-in with our friend out there. He sure was calm for someone in his situation. Is that one of our snowcats, Major? I pointed behind him. And if so, how? Yes, sir. Whatever it was, it came in fast and dropped what looked like coal. Everything touched by the coal burst into flames. He looked back and into the sky. One of our long-range radios was hit dead center, melted into slag on contact. Injuries. I touched where the journal sat in my pocket. It was unnaturally warm, even through the Arctic wear. It was hard to focus on my job. No, sir. Johnson shook his head. Close calls from debris. Nothing a band-aid won't fix. At that moment, a light once again buzzed the camp. A tent at the edge of the camp exploded. Johnson blinked. The fuel depot for vehicles and some generators, he growled. Major, you have to stop that thing before somebody gets hurt or killed. I stared at the blaze consuming the fueling tent. Or we freeze from lack of fuel for the generators. Yes, sir. We will do our best. He turned and laughed. I decided my own tent was more private than the food tent. The journal pulled at me. I had no reason to ignore its call. Inside my tent, I settled into my cot and started reading again. The 30th of October, in the year of our Lord, 1866. So much has happened since the last time that I wrote in my journal. The mutineers were put adrift on an ice floe. We gave them a raft and provisions for a month if they rationed. One of the men was a map reader, so we copied off directions from our coordinates to the nearest island off Greenland's coast. The massive ice was headed toward that island. They would make it long before they ran out of fuel for a fire and food. I know this sounds cruel, but it was better than what maritime law would have done to them, which was death hanging from a mast. The light showed after dark, which was 10 minutes after we had set the men off the ship. A bright beam from one of the lights illuminated the flow of ice. As the men screamed for mercy, they disappeared into the light. The raft and rations went with them. It was a horrible experience and one that I hope we do not have to go through again. The next day, the ice seemed thicker than before. and we slowed to almost no forward speed. With these sails at full and the steam engine at max thrust, we inched forward. As the days dragged on, we carved a path ever north until we broke through that accursed ice floe. Ahead of us was open water, with some icebergs dotting the scene before us. My new watch was set to look for icebergs as we sailed northward. Tobias, as usual, is the first to volunteer for this cold duty. Today, we spotted what looked like land or more ice. It's hard to know for sure. Beth, do you know what awaits us at the North Pole? The 10th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. Disaster has come to our expedition, and I fear that we are all doomed. This new land was sheets of ice as far as one could see. Rivers of slush flowed from some distant source, so we sailed into the mouth of one of those weird rivers. For a few days, it was a normal sailing, like sailing a river. We found the way narrowing, and ran aground on an ice shelf before we could turn the ship. We unloaded sleds and dog teams that we brought with us, and set out in scouting parties to see if it widened again. All we found was a narrowing to nothing, no more than a mile away. The captain had the engine room reverse the propeller and attempted to back off the ice ledge that we had hit. The steel-lined keel had a bit deep into the ice, and the ship was not going to move without more help. We ran lines from the fore and aft of the ship, and all hands were pulling as the ship reversed engines. Lights lit the sky as we struggled to haul the ship free. Snow was falling and the cold air became painful as the temperature around us dropped. Between the weather change and the things in the sky, we were all getting spooked. The ship slipped loose the bonds holding it and floated free again, but it was for naught. The drop in temperature had the way back frozen solid in minutes. All we could do was hope for warmer temps tomorrow and try to reverse course. The night was sub-zero, and our little swaths of man-made warmth became smaller. Tobias has taken to walking the deck at night looking for the lights. I checked in on him when I could make sure that he was warm. Beth, will we make it home? This place was never meant for man. The 11th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. Writing is keeping me sane, so I must capture all of these spectacles that we were a part of. More lights are in the sky. It is midday, but the cloud cover is keeping the temperature low and the ice frozen. The clouds are dark and angry, with flicks of lightning galloping back and forth like Hermes traveling between the gods. The crew is a superstitious lot, like most seamen, and are performing old maritime customs to ward against the supernatural. The ice is still frozen behind us, and a blizzard is all around us. Tobias is altering between manic activity and watching the lights spin around us in the sky. I hope tomorrow is a better day. I do not know how long we can keep our sanity in this environment. Beth, one more day in this icy hell might be one day closer to you in heaven. Screams in the night dragged me back from getting lost in this window to the past. Rohan ran toward me as I rushed out of my tent. He yelled something before his head went one way and his body another. The dislodged head rolled toward me, blood pounding in my ears as my eyes followed the trail of blood from head to body. Blood still pumped out of his neck. I could not look away. The nightmare appeared behind Rowan's body. White skin stretched over the outlines of bone, muscle, and sinew, topped by the face of a horned demon. It crouched like it had defied God and was now hiding to escape his holy wrath. It held a staff with a blade glowing and crackling with energy. The journal grew warmer, uncomfortably so, the closer the nightmare got. When it was within striking distance, it froze. Something in my brain screamed for me to flee. I tried to move, but all I could do was raise my hand in defense, still clutching the journal. I expected to lose my head like poor Rowan. The creature stared at the front of the journal. It screamed a horrible growling roar and ran off at an unbelievable speed, leaving me untouched. Johnson ran up from the north of the camp. In shock, my legs were fighting to keep me standing. "Are you okay, sir?" Johnson gave me a quick look over and saw Rowan's head at my feet. God, poor guy. Everything was in slow motion. I was dimly aware of Johnson calling our medic Jake. After what seemed like an eternity, a few soldiers and Jake arrived. While these soldiers bagged Rowan's parts, Johnson and Jake led me to the medical tent. "What kept the creature from attacking you?" Johnson was intrigued by my survival, but I was too numb from shock to talk. "He took out all of Rowan's team and, as you saw, chased Rowan out of the specimen tent and, well..." I looked at him and gestured with the book that I still held. "It was afraid of this, I think." "A book? That thing was afraid of a book." Johnson eyed the journal. "Is it dangerous?" "It's been in my possession since we found it out there." I pointed toward the direction of our last expedition. "It seems like it's more of a danger to it than to us." "Okay, we'll keep it close and stay inside until we get that thing." "Don't worry, I'm going back to my tent when Jake gives the all clear. I'll keep researching this remarkable find." Jake smiled and gave me a thumbs up. Johnson followed me out into the snow. He escorted me, gun drawn, to my tent, and left once he saw that I was safe in my domicile. I opened the journal and found my place. Before I lost myself in these stories again, I realized that I craved this book like an addict craves a drug. Was I in over my head? Feeling foolish, I delved back into the book's entries. The 25th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. I have not written because nothing has happened since my last entry. We are all still stuck and spend our days trying to survive the intense cold, and find ways to stay sane as we try different ideas to get us out of this mess. All of this while the light swooped ever closer to our ship day and night. But last night, this all changed when one of the lights came and hovered over us like a hummingbird at a flower. Its bright glow dimmed, and we could make out what haunted us was a machine. A metal cocoon hanging motionless over us. Flames shot out of the side of the flying metal machine. For a moment, the thing was like an iron dragon spouting fire over us. It wobbled like a drunken sailor on weekend leave and slowly moved off in a northern direction. As it got farther from us, it also grew dimmer. The blizzard covered its movements and we lost sight of it. After a few minutes, a loud roar reached our ears and a bright glow bloomed in the night, like a mushroom growing in the direction the metal beast had staggered. Not long after, a horrible hot wind hit us and threw gear and people around like a child stomping through a pile of leaves. Tobias has a sprained ankle. Pieces of debris shot from their place of rest like arrows by this hell-spawned wind. Tomorrow, after we attend our wounds and gather these scattered camp equipment, we will hunt for our elusive harasser and find what fate has befallen the Iron Dragon. Beth, what is happening here? Has some supernatural monster come to roost in the Arctic? The 26th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. As dawn broke, our people stirred and prepared for our expedition. We found some of us were taken with a strange sickness, leaving them weak and loose of bowel. Some had high fevers and lost their hair as well. Energized and ready to leave, I showed no sign of sickness. Tobias was also ready to go. He gathered those of us who were still well enough, and with our boss, Joram's blessing, we proceeded north. We left with enough supplies and tents to be able to find this thing as long as we did not travel more than 3 or 4 days. We prepared the sleds and dog teams and headed toward the glow still in the sky. After 5 hours, we were 30 miles north of our ship, looking for a campsite for the first day. By dark, we had established our camp. The temperatures were dropping fast and more snow moved in, but blessedly, it looked to be snowfall and not another blizzard. Harim Knoll, one of our archaeologists, was puking around midnight, and shortly after, he lay dead. Whatever plague befalling our people was fast and lethal. We could all be dead before we can return home. Beth, how long before this invisible killer kills us all? The 27th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. This morning, we buried Harim and broke camp. We pushed hard all day to take our mind off of his death, and to get this trip over with before we all fell to this illness. Tobias is in a strange mood today. He jumped on one of the guys for taking extra time to relieve himself during a break. My brother never acts like this, and I worry that he may be feeling sick or too much stress over our situation. We covered another 30 miles today before we stopped for the night. Not sure how far we have to go yet. The glow in the night is still as bright and does not seem to get any closer. Beth, will I wait tomorrow and find that I am next? The 28th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. God, what has happened to everyone? I woke up early and found more sick and dead among our people. It is now Tobias and I. Something else is wrong. I found 2 people knifed to death. Did they kill each other? No, it's impossible. They were on opposite ends of the camp and the wounds were fatal. Neither could have walked away to die elsewhere. Who killed them? I know I did not. Tobias is again in a foul mood, not equal to our losing good people. He is not sad. He is mad. Like something inside is twisted and is showing itself. He yelled at me over my curiosity at the deaths of the 2 men. I hope I'm wrong and he's not the killer. Maybe somebody else is following us out in the white. We buried the others and to mark their graves so we could carry them back on the return trip. My brother would not entertain the idea of turning around, so we have traveled 35 miles today. I could hear him muttering to himself all day, and I've grown fearful for his sanity at this point. Beth, Tobias is acting strange. I wish you were here to help me get him to confide in me. The 29th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1866. I woke last night to something crunching around in the snow. I quietly loaded my pistol and went out into the night. I could not see anything in the range of my lantern, and Tobias was asleep when I checked on him. Maybe an animal had walked through. Hopefully not one of the big white bears that we saw as we sailed here. As I headed back to my tent, I saw a white flash behind my brother's tent. I went investigating but found nothing. I returned to my tent and tried to sleep. I had entered Sandman's realm when someone entered the tent. I warily opened my eyes. Through the haze of sleep, I made out my brother standing over me, knife in hand. Startled by this nightmare, I jumped up from the cot. The empty tent had its tent flap open and letting in cold. Was it a dream? Or something more sinister? Day came and we once again journeyed north, following the glow of the unearthly object out there in the snow. How can I look my brother in the eye when I believe him to be a murderer? Beth, Tobias is my brother. How can he be evil? I heard Major Johnson outside, so I opened my tent door a crack. Johnson rushed in like the world was on fire and my tent was the last safe place. Mid's back, hovering north of the camp, sitting there watching us. Well, go shoot it. This is why you're here. My irritation turned to fear when he backed away, wild-eyed. We did. Most of my men are bloodstains in the snow. He sank into an empty chair, exhausted. I'm the only one left. We need to live or give them back all the samples. Are you insane? These specimens are the find of the century. Those pieces of the thing will advance metallurgy hundreds of years. Johnson launched from the chair and grabbed me as I tried to sit. How do you know what is important? He yelled, shaking me angrily. All you've done is read this book since we got back. Instead of reading it, you should take it out there and throw it as far as you can. It is out there waiting for you to finish so it can kill us all, including you. Let go of me. I'm your superior. I say what happens here and you best not forget it. He dropped me but continued to glare, his face inches from mine. Now get out and keep this camp safe, or I will find somebody who can. You'll get us killed, but I'll protect your people the best I can if you won't. When the monster comes back, I'll point your tent out for it to find its possessions. He stormed out, so I went back to reading. The 30th of November in the year of our Lord, 1866. This could be my last entry. Today, I am devastated. Tobias has revealed his true self. As we made our way to the resting place of the metal craft from the sky, the more he became angry and unhinged. The closer that we came to the resting place of the metal craft, the louder he mumbled to himself. During a loud rant, he let slip his true nature. He had killed my beautiful Beth. He stabbed her with the knife that he had also stabbed me with. I wrestled with him and almost got the knife from him before he stabbed me in the side. His madness made him strong, and he threw me off like I was nothing but a flea. While I lay in the snow, writhing with pain, he paced back and forth. Tobias raved about how she had been too good for me and her beauty, a trap that he broke me out of. He spoke in madness, and I see now that he is also the one killing off people during the trip. My brother has always had a temper problem. I see now it was an illness. This madness must have gripped my brother for a long time, and this strange trip had pushed him off the ledge that he was on. His madness subsided and he ran off into the snow. I write this after patching my wound as best as I can, and I'm proceeding with my sled to the craft. If I am to die here, I want my last breath while seeing wonders from the night sky. The 1st of December in the year of our Lord, 1866. I am here. I have found the skycraft. Tobias is out there following me. The wound aches, but I am still able to walk. Beth, be with me on this last adventure. I turned the page, and to my surprise, the next page was a video display. I saw debris like an aircraft crash site, a dog sled, a man limping toward the camera, another man sneaking up on him. I could only assume that it was Nick and Tobias, and the video captured from the craft's cameras. The video switched to a different view. Nick limped to the machine while Tobias hid behind debris. Though I knew he couldn't hear me, I wanted to warn Nick. Tobias jumped Nick and they fell to the ground, fighting. Nick managed to knock the knife from his brother's grab. They both struggled to grab it. Nick managed to grab the ivory-handled instrument of death. He stabbed Tobias, rolled away from the writhing body, and dropped the knife instead. Limping more than before, he reached the side of the ship. I could see bright white light pouring from a door as it opened. The view changed to the ship's inside. Small gray and white beings watched Nick as he limped in. Off to the left, a woman walked toward him. The beauty of the woman is like an angel from heaven. Nick looked at her in astonishment before he enveloped her in a hug. You could see surprise on her face before returning the hug. Sound poured from the book. They spoke German, and so I translated below. Her speech sounded mechanical, like a translation program. I thought I lost you. Where have you been, Beth? I've always been here. Ah, I see. In your mind, you see me as your dead wife. I do resemble her, but I am not her. The woman helped the sagging Nick from falling. Come, I will take you to our medical center where we will heal your wounds. They walked down the hall, followed by other beings. The camera, set to capture movement, flashed to the door as Tobias rolled inside. Nick and the alien woman walked into a room with a table in the middle and a console on one wall. Everything was bright, clean, and blindingly white. I could only assume a sterile environment from the cleanliness. What happened? Why did you crash? The woman looked sad. She helped Nick on the table and turned to the console. We picked up those men you left hoping to help them get home. She touched the console and arms unfolded from the ceiling above the table. We didn't know you had left them because they were violent. They acted normal for a bit until we flew low to see if we could cut away for you in the ice. They attacked our pilots and damaged our flight controls as we hovered over your ship. They were killed by an explosion of energy from the console that they had damaged. We barely made it without more damage. As the arms worked on Nick, Tobias barged in, intent on killing his brother. The knife hit one of the mechanical arms and a bright flash overwhelmed the camera. When it cleared, a nightmare scene appeared. The woman lay on the floor, motionless. Nick was transformed, shorter and thicker, almost armored looking. But the real nightmare was standing front and center of the feed. It was the demon that I saw, horned head and white skin pulled over bone. I believe this was Tobias, and the bot must have malfunctioned and changed them. Tobias became the darkness in his soul, and Nick, well, I don't know. In the corner of the screen, the woman stirred, pulling something from her pocket. She aimed at Tobias, who screamed and fled. The camera switched to follow as he headed deeper into the ship. Switching back, Nick stirred and the alien woman examined him. In a language not of this earth, she sent the gray beings out in the hall. She handed Nick a red coat from a closet in the wall. Thank you, Beth. What has happened to me? She shook her head and sadness tinged her beautiful features. Your brother and his madness attacked you as the medbot healed your wounds. She paused. A tear rolled down her face. I'm sorry. It has changed you and your brother. The robot glitched when his knife damaged a circuit. You are no longer fully human, Nick. The medbot mixed DNA from our people into your cells, and it made you immortal and armored to protect you from the creature your brother has become. Your brother's madness is now manifest. He is what you call in your legends a Krampus, because this image was in his head when the machine overloaded, and it changed him into that image. You mean my brother is now a demon? Nick looked bewildered by it all. Yes, and there is more. Your personality has been altered and will soon override your current state. You had a tumor in your brain and the medical robot removed it. It was in the personality area of your mind, and it was responsible for your deep depression at times. Because of the damage, it did not have a chance to equalize your emotions. She looked back at the screen on the machine. You will find yourself immensely joyful at times, as happy as you were ever depressed. This is too much. I can't take this. I need time to consider all of this. Nick sat and the woman, Beth, sat as well. You look so much like her. I am a hybrid. I have human and alien DNA in my body, the same as you. Nick frowned, confused. She continued. Your Beth may have been one of us living among you as a test. DNA, a test. Even as a video image, I could tell Nick was bewildered by her explanation. Oh, yes, I forgot. Your science isn't there yet. She looked deep in thought. It is the building blocks of your body. It is what determines how you look, among other things. And I have this alien DNA in me now as well. Yes, your brother's ill-timed attack caused all kinds of changes to both of you that we never intended. A beep sounded and I saw her look at a device on her wrist. This gets worse. Your brother has taken a landcraft and some of the Alona with him. The video sputtered and stopped. What were Alona? More writing on the next page. It looked like Nick's, but with different timestamps. 24th of December, 1867. After a lot of adjustment, my new life has purpose. Krampus plots humanity's destruction. The Alona were members of the white-skinned alien race who opposed the Grey Elves' idea of peaceful integration with humans. Beth has helped me get used to the new abilities of my body. I can change shape and nothing can puncture my skin. Our spy in my brother's camp reported Krampus has found a way to corrupt already naughty children and use them to build his army. He is a machine that moves a substance similar in shape to coal through the ether to them, and it takes over their mind and steals their soul. Luckily for us, its power supply is broken and it takes a year to charge. Beth says the machine is a teleporter and we also have one. I went back to the camp and found survivors. The ship was destroyed by ice and the men were at the end of their supplies when I found them. Beth and I made them believe in the danger the world was in, and we came upon a unique plan. They are heading back to Germany and to the rest of the world to boost the legends of Santa and warn the world of Krampus. One of the men is Oliver Kringle, a relative of my wife Beth, and a hybrid as well. He had followed us, believing one of us was the murderer of his cousin. Kringle? That's my last name. What the hell? His anger over what Tobias did to my Beth mirrored my own, and his confusion over the new Beth beside me was understandable. She has taken a liking to me, and I have to her, so I hope she will be my new Mrs. Claus. Kringle will lead the German contingent, getting Europe prepared. Using our teleporter, I can once a year send out a blocking device to protect the children of the world. This device will be hidden in toys so the children will keep them close for the year. Our equipment detects the minds of good children and helps protect them from Krampus's poison. For the rest, we shall build a list and check it twice for naughty or nice children. I will visit each on Christmas night to be sure I prevent Krampus's coal from stealing the children's souls. So Santa is real. No way. The 25th of December, 1868. Good night. I saved many children. Our devices disguised as toys went out to everyone that we could detect and last. Beth is my management. She keeps the elves working, building the toy disguises for our device to prevent Krampus's coal from corrupting the children of the world. Some of the elves have fixed the escape ship. They are launching tomorrow to return home and bring us help before Krampus's elves figure out how to bypass our current device. I hope we can keep his efforts to destroy the world contained until they can return in a few thousand years. The 25th of December, 1939. Krampus has the whole world at war. Men, evil and good, fighting in trenches far from their homes. Krampus is gaining power. We have lost Kringle's network. I am proceeding as usual and hope that it is enough to prevent the apocalypse. I know what happened. During World War II, my family fled Germany to America. My great-great-great-grandfather was killed helping the rest of us escape from the Gestapo squads. He was an electronics genius who didn't want his inventions stolen. Most of the entries after this are claws repeating how they once again stopped Krampus. But several entries have interesting information. 25th of December, 2018. The world is losing faith in Santa Claus. I had to spend a lot of this year finding new allies in the battle for the world. I found Crinkle's descendants and one is like his ancestors. He will make a great leader of a new American team supporting our efforts against Krampus. The 23rd of December, 2019. What is he planning this year? A strong energy signal is building at his base. Human satellites will soon see these emissions. We have to stop them before it draws too much attention. Our elves are working hard, getting toys ready for transport. The teleportation system is charging. The elves fueled these sled engines in case I needed to do a reconnaissance. The 24th of December, 2019. There is an exploration team out there in the snow. Beth had pinpointed them today. I went out in the sled to get a look at them. The journal stopped here, because we shot at him. My tent ripped open. Krampus stood there growling. The bladed staff he killed Rowan with glowed, ready to take my head off. Shots rang out and I saw Johnson firing his rifle at Krampus as he advanced on my tent. With a roar, Krampus turned and ran Johnson down, slicing his head from his body, which continued firing for a moment. Krampus laughed. He advanced toward me, slicing the air in front of him with every step. I couldn't move. He was going to kill me, and I couldn't lift the journal that I still held. Behind me, something came to rest. Krampus stopped his blade just out of reach of my head. "Hold, Tobias. You shall not kill this man tonight." I unfroze and turned. A jolly fat man in red stood behind me. He tapped his staff in the ground. "Kris Kringle, stand behind me. Krampus shall have no power here tonight." Growls came from behind the monster and miniature versions of him fanned out. "Nick, you were always a fool. I killed your wife and our team, and had it not been for the mess with the healing room, I would have ended your miserable life as well. Curse you and your luck." Krampus rushed Nick. Sparks flew where his blade was parried with Santa's staff. Nick pushed Krampus away like he was a ragdoll and swung his staff in the air. Lightning rained on the miniature Krampuses. Tobias screamed in pain. "Damn you, Nick. One day I will end you and the elves." Krampus jumped and disappeared into a light swooping in from the clouds. Nick and I were alone. The camp was silent. Was I the only one left? "Nicholas Claus, I read your book. I am grateful for being saved, yet I have questions." I held the book up. "Why did you mention my family name here?" "Your ancestor, Oliver Kringle, was a hybrid like Beth, but neither of them knew this." He sat in an undamaged chair. "As you know, after the World War broke out, your great-great-great-grandfather moved his whole family to America. Only someone with enough DNA of the Greys can operate Greys technology. One of your great cousins had enough alien genes in him to help my work. We made sure one of you with the ability would always be around to operate our detection systems." He pointed to the book that I was still holding out. "You see, you can use our tech, or opening that book would have killed you." "You mean the owner of K-Tech Inc. is a relative of mine?" I said as well. "Why have I not been told that I was related?" Santa laughed. It was a jolly sound. "Kris, I am sorry, but there is much I cannot explain right now. Krampus may be back, and it is soon to be Christmas. Get back to your main camp and return to send out the toys, so I can prevent the creation of more of those things you saw tonight." "Those were children?" No, they are created by the souls of children. A child's soul is a powerful tool for my brother to create the creatures of his army. We need to go now. He rose from the chair and touched my arm. We were in a sled in a blink, which was being pulled by 12 mechanical reindeer. Seconds later, we landed at 20 miles away outside the main base. His eyes twinkled. He put a finger to the side of his nose. Goodbye, Chris. We may meet again. He pointed at the journal. Keep my knowledge safe. One day you may be called to carry on the fight. Advanced knowledge will be helpful, I believe. He pulled out another journal and touched it to the one that I held. I now have a backup, so I won't lose the information. It is important to always remember our humanity. With a wink and a smile, his sled blasted into the night. I heard him yell as he sped away. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. So, I am here writing this to let everybody know that Santa is real, and so is Krampus. You better watch out. Krampus is coming for our children, and they better be nice so Santa can protect them every Christmas night. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something that you would love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you would like? Or is that lost in childhood? For most people, and myself included, that answer is probably no. But therapy can be a great way to help you reconnect with yourself and that sense of wonder that you had when you were younger. Personally, therapy has helped me greatly with my mental health and has helped empower me to be a better version of myself. If therapy has ever interested you, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/MrCreeps today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MrCreeps. I was a correctional officer at a supermax prison. It was near Florence, Colorado. I stayed as an employee there for a half a decade. I saw almost everything that you can imagine. Escape attempts, stabbings, and riots. Also sharp weaponry that was hidden in places that you would rather not visualize. These are only some of the more unpleasant occurrences that I have dealt with in the past. I am currently writing this on encrypted Wi-Fi from an undisclosed but safe location. I have had a change of careers following the events of the tale that I'm about to share with you now. I hope that people thinking about becoming prison guards read my story and reconsider any future life choices that they will look back on as a mistake. The warden called me into his office on a Monday. During the entire walk there down the hallways, I thought of the trouble that I could be in. Shut the door, he said as he looked up at me from his desk after I had entered. Those words sealed it to my mind. How much hot water I was in for some sort of infraction that I was not aware of yet. Bureaucratic, micromanaging, and constant procedural changes were nothing new to me. I still hated petty political grievances. I nodded and sealed the entranceway. He demanded I take a seat, and I did. You're the best officer here, he said. I waited for the but. I anticipated news of termination. I saw a forced transfer to some mundane position. Filing paperwork headed my way. I want to give you an opportunity, he said. You'll make $600,000 in 1 year. Your benefits will remain unchanged. You will have less oversight than what is present for you now. You would be in a leadership position, albeit an isolated one. That sounds ideal. I said as my mind swam in the possibilities of how much profit he had offered. There are only two things that we ask of you. One is that you cannot tell anybody about your new position. Two is that you locate somewhere else. There's a prison in the Arctic, and that is where your life will be for the next 365 days. The confusion must have been readable on my face. If your wife asks you, tell her that you're going to a federal academy. There is no cell service or Wi-Fi there. Any contact you make with her must be through snail mail. We will handle the addresses given. If you decline this offer, then this conversation never happened. Do you understand? I contemplated the pros and cons. Before I became law enforcement, I was a bodyguard. I was gone from the house for extended periods. Even though it would be time with the wife lost, the fortune would help both of us. I agreed. The prison facility was a large compound, not much bigger than the place that I had patrolled before. A few things jumped out at me when I first laid eyes on the populace there. They all had wounds on their faces, and they spoke a strange, guttural language that I was unfamiliar with. Why do they talk in such a bizarre tongue? I asked myself as I would walk down the blocks. The new warden that I worked under had the last name of Buckley. He had noticeable scar tissue beneath his eyes. His attitude towards me at the beginning was hardly welcoming. If anything, he acted as though I was a burden. He seemed to resent me due to the mere possibility of having to train me on things. One evening, Buckley ordered me to do a cell extraction. Christopher Aluko was the name of the inmate that we had to deal with. On the walk there, I asked my boss what Aluko had done to end up here. I'm not allowed to tell you what these scumbags have accomplished to wind up here, Buckley said. He had started his career in crime by cannibalizing his sister, though tonight our only goal is to get him moved to the hole. He's proven himself to be way too dangerous to share a space with anyone. The doors of each cell were closer to that of an insane asylum than a prison. They were complete barriers that you could not see through. It was me and 3 other guards who were about to deal with this high-profile detainee. The supervisor was present, doing the thing that bosses generally do. That is to say that he remained on standby and didn't get his hands dirty. Upon walking in, the first thing that I saw was Aluko sitting upright on his cot. I noticed that he was huge, at least 6'8" and 320 pounds of pure muscle. His skin cracked all over. His face had the normal scarring that I associated with most people in this place. I'm going to need you to stand up and put your hands behind your back, I said. I kept my hand near the holster where the pepper spray was. Show me respect and I'll show you the same, I continued. You won't have handcuffs on you for long if you cooperate. You were not better than me, Aluko said. His voice had a baritone quality, which I had expected from a man of his size. What I did not was how weird it sounded. It was as though 4 or 5 people were chanting the words in unison. All right, I said. Let's get you moved to where you need to go. The faster we do this, the better off we'll be. You shot at someone in broad daylight when you were in a gang years ago, Aluko said. It took 10 years for the paranoia to go away. The fear of the cops coming to arrest you for a potential murder before you became a low-grade one yourself. To this day, you don't know if any innocent civilians got caught in the crossfire. We had to restrain his huge arms and place the metal bracelets on his wrists. He laughed all the while. As we brought him to solitary, I thought of his words and how much they had unsettled me. They were true, and that story from my past was one that I had not told anybody. Near the end of the shift, Buckley went into one of these sniper towers and smoked a cigarette. Since my duties for the day were complete, I took the spiral staircase to the level that he stood on. When I saw him, I was only a few mere inches away from where he puffed. He didn't seem to mind or even care about the footsteps behind him. He focused on the distant and lowering winter sun. The caged animal back there said something which he shouldn't have, I said. Part of the job is having thick skin, he said as he flicked his cigarette over the edge into the snow. He turned around to face me. It's not about that, I said. Oh, did he hurt your poor little feelings? He had an insight into my past that no one has, I said as a bitter taste filled my mouth. Well, that's unfortunate. It means you lied to the oral board when you got into the position that you're in now. You shouldn't lie to your employers. I need to know what kind of prison this is, I said as I felt blood rush to my head. Why does everybody have open sores all over their body and face? Are they exposed to some kind of virus? And if so, are we susceptible? Either that or they're always high on something. That would explain why they're always speaking gibberish. And how in the heck do they know things that I haven't even told the closest people in my life? They're better to do the job assigned. Don't worry about things above your pay grade. Buckley pulled out another pack of cigarettes and lit one. I hope we're not exposed to dangers that we weren't warned about. I'll have to find a way to get the word out. If you break your non-disclosure agreement, it would be far worse than a termination. Your wife back home, the one with the dark curly hair and the nice curves, I would hate to see the impact of your decisions on her. That was when I grabbed him by the lapels and shoved him to the ground. I considered throwing elbows. The idea of him making him taste his own blood was satisfying. I didn't want to be incarcerated in this den of misery, though, out of all places. Buckley started laughing. What he did next took me by complete surprise. He patted me on the back with his free hand, instead of trying to defend himself or resist. You've proven your point, he said as he pushed on my chest. Now get off me. I don't want to give the signal to one of my buddies in the next tower. He has a modded Remington 700 pointed at you. I released him. After he stood and brushed some frost off, he made eye contact with me. I respect you for your bravery. Most people wouldn't be willing to do that to me, especially someone beneath me in rank. But tell you what, I'll shed a little bit of light on what kind of place this is for you, and if I ever find out that you told anyone, you'll wish that you would have died at birth. I felt the adrenaline start to wear off. As my energy lowered, I nodded, thereby giving tacit agreement to his new offer. I looked to my left and saw the sniper that he was referring to. It occurred to me that if he had wanted to take action against me, he could have had me executed right then and there. Buckley waved at me to follow him as we made our way down the steps. He escorted me through the yard, ice encased the weight sets and pull-up bars. We followed the chain-link fence to another facility that he had coded key access. After he put in the correct digits, he swung the door open. We made our way down a hallway that didn't seem modern. There were lit torches on the walls. The flooring was pallid cobblestone. He brought me into another room which was the size of an auditorium. A man stood up and he wore all black clothing with a white collar, and it took me a while to recognize him as a priest. I saw rows of long tables, one fit for a king in an ancient era. Crucifixes, rosaries, chalices of water, and stacks of dusty books lined every corner. I skimmed to some of the titles and saw that a few were in a different language. Father Lamora, Buckley said as he stared at the man of the cloth. What are you doing down here? The priest pointed to his left. When I shifted my eyes in that direction, I did not immediately notice the presence of a fourth person in the room. This one was one of the inmates tied down on a slab, As soon as we had focused our collective attention on him, the man came to life. He started struggling against his restraints. A red-tinged substance poured from his mouth like foam from a rabid dog. "I have almost driven the evil entity out," the priest said. Buckley turned to me. "What is going on here?" I asked. I had the irresistible urge to run screaming in the other direction. I knew that I could not take my chances out in the harshest cold, but a part of me was willing to at least try. "This prison's budget comes from the Vatican. We only take inmates possessed by something greater than general sadism or psychopathy. In the official government paperwork, they call this place the House of the Demonium. If you want to atone for the sins that I know you're guilty of, now would be an excellent time. Help us read the incantation needed to cleanse this heathen." Heart-possessed inmates were flown in from around the world. The evening the young girl came to our gates via the bus was an unusual occurrence. The transporting officers rolled her towards me on a gurney. She fought against her restraints. She screamed in the dense and layered voice that I had become used to at that point. She wore a tattered and old beige-colored dress. Bloodstains marked her clothing. I made a mental note to try and get her some blankets once she was in her new home. Her name was Anna. There were a few things that made her different from the others. For starters, her eyes were milky. She retained the same faraway gaze that they all had, but it was as though her pupils indicated narcotic use. Her eyes never got any clearer during the entirety of my time monitoring her. There was one singular trait that made her stand out from the others. She often quieted down her yelling once she was in the presence of the staff. The inmates usually never cared who they were in front of, unless it was to unearth our secrets or to shame us. She minded her manners. This was as alarming as much as it was respectful. Once I had placed her in the cell, I knew that I had to bind her to the bed after removing her from the gurney. As soon as I unbuckled one of the straps on her wrist, she reached up and tried to claw at my face. I ducked her strike. I reached towards my belt for a canister. If this were a normal prison, I would have been filled with mace. Mine brimmed with holy water instead. I sprayed at her. Smoke emanated from her skin and she let loose a cry of anguish. I undid the rest of her straps and moved her to the bed. I shut the door and went to lunch. The lodging for the employees was 3 separate rows of cabins. The most luxurious ones belonged to leadership. The second most comfortable apartments were the priests. The third, and needless to say the most decrepit, provided shelter for the officers. Even though my space was hardly glamorous, it became my sanctuary. I was able to work out, read paperback books, and journal. These activities helped maintain my mental sanity. I stared at the ceiling and thought how unsettled I was about the girl. Every inmate had a glitter of humanity, and something about her made me want to investigate her past. Word spread amongst the employees how there was only one computer in the entire facility. It contained the reports database. It was in our warden's office. Rumor also circulated that he had access to the inmates' rap sheets. Buckley had verified this for me in one of our prior conversations, though it was an accident. I waited until after hours to enter Buckley's space. I managed to bribe one of the janitors with extra snacks. Never underestimate the power of common items in the penitentiary. Buckley had left his computer on without signing out. Navigating the digital database of various inmates' profiles was tricky. While I wanted to look up different names, I decided to focus on the young girl. I searched for every Anna until I found the one that I was looking for. A few things stood out to me about her right away. The main body of text on her infractions had many redactions. I printed it out and I grabbed the papers. I closed the door behind me and headed down the hallway back to my lodging. I read the document on my walk. Even though she was only 20 years old, she was also a nuisance to society. She had burnt down a halfway house that she was staying at. She was there for many DUIs. Several judges had given her breaks, so they decided to put her in mental health facilities instead of jail. She kept attacking the staff there. The worst of these was when she stabbed a nurse in the jugular. The RN survived but had to talk through a voice box for the rest of her life. I was right outside my door when I heard a familiar voice. "You're out late," Officer Nwoso said. I turned around and saw his large frame. In the 2 months that I had been there, I got to know the man well. He had come here from the Arizona State Prison Complex, and we had swapped some other stories. His tales of the encounters that he had with death row prisoners had intrigued me. "Well, what do you have there?" Nwoso asked. "A guidebook on how to perform a successful exorcism," I had lied. "I didn't think you liked working off duty." We do what we have to." "How did you get it?" "They won't let us use the internet here." "I found it under the seat of the mobile unit," I said. I didn't feel good about falsifying information to appear that I had respect for her. "Oh, I see. I came here to ask if you have any extra coffee. I'm out and I don't want to go all the way down to my locker to get some in the morning if I can help it." "Yeah, no problem," I said as I unlocked the door and invited him in. I stuffed the papers under my mattress so that he wouldn't be able to read them. I reached into my backpack and pulled out some instant packets. I gave them to him and saw that he had stared at my collection of books. At the far end was a Bible. His eyes locked on it. He grabbed the coffee packs and he looked at me. "Do you believe what they're telling us?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "About God and the devil. All these biblical villains taking control of all the people here. It seems far-fetched to me. There has to be something more going on. What if this is an asylum for those with undiagnosed mental illness? The kind researchers aren't advanced enough to understand yet. Have you ever thought of that?" I sat down. "I don't think science has the answer," I said. "The ones in here are gifted with preternatural abilities. It's like they can read our minds or at least our past, no matter how secretive we are. I never felt as though I have less power than I do since I came here. All I know is that I can't pretend to understand everything, whether it's celestial or empirical. I cannot feign understanding of the evil within these walls. To pretend otherwise is arrogance." Buckley Nwoso, a priest, and I walked together to Anna's cell. We could hear her screaming from within a 300-foot distance. The other lamentations of the prisoners became drowned out by her wailing. We entered her cell. Words written in blood around the wall. They were Latin. She stared at us with a smile. Her face seemed puffier than usual, which emphasized the wounds on her face. The priest pulled out a rusted black crucifix. He raised it in her direction as he approached her. Her screams grew louder with each advancing step. He pulled out a small pocket Bible and read a prayer from it. "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into Hades Satan and all evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen." Her eyes became less opaque. I was able to make out their green color for the first time. She gazed at me and spoke intelligible words for the first time since her forced visitation. Your mother died an early death because she found out you joined a gang, Anna said with a mocking laugh. I turned around to see if anybody was staring at me with judgment. The expressions were neutral until they turned into worry. Everybody in the room knew they would have to wait their turn for public humiliation. You accepted a bribe to stay silent after an inmate stabbed another one to death, she said to Nuoso. Nuoso muttered something under his breath. He stated the inmate was a horrible person who mistreated children. He commented on how the earth was lighter without the presence of such a person weighing it down. You, Anna said as she stared at Buckley. You are the worst out of everyone. Your wife dies by drowning, and you received her up her life insurance policy. Wait until they look deeper into that. What I saw next horrified me. Buckley screamed out the word no as he lunged at her. His hands wrapped around her throat before one of her legs broke free from its binding and kicked him in the ribs. He must have forgotten to wear his vest that day, because he folded and landed on the ground. The priest placed the cross on her forehead and left a permanent mark there. She passed out. Her exhalation before she lost consciousness made her body deflate into unnatural thinness. Buckley called me into his office the next day. He asked me to take a seat with a menacing tone. He slammed the door and sat behind his desk. Do you even want to work here anymore? I know this employment opportunity is a very unique one, but it's not for everyone. You knew when you became a corrections officer that this type of job requires more mental fortitude than the most professions. This isn't any different because we're operating in uncharted territory. Have I done something wrong? I asked. You entered my office after hours, he said as he banged his fist on the table. I don't know what your motivation was. Are you starting to believe what some of these inmates are saying about me? They don't see our sins with full impunity. They know enough about our interior lives and what bothers us enough to get under our skin. It is us versus them. Once you side with the enemy, then you're no good to the team here, let alone me. If you're running some kind of vigilante investigation against me, two can play at that. Believe me when I say you don't want to be on my bad side. If you're going to fire me, I said, I won't make excuses. You should know that I wasn't trying to get you in trouble or dig up any dirt. I wanted to look up any and all information that I could on Anna. She seemed to be more in control of what possessed her than the others. I wanted to figure out what made her so unique in that regard. I figured that if I ever wound up possessed, I could weaponize whatever she used. You're like a child, he said as he stood and paced back and forth. Do yourself a favor and stay within your pay grade. The Vatican has hired scientists to study behavior during possessions. In the old days, they would have dismissed it as different demons. You don't have a degree in microbiology any more than I do. We are muscle hired to make sure that demonologists are safe when they do their job. So you do yours. Yes, sir. I felt as though I had backed down and given him some sort of sovereignty over me. I also knew that if I lied or resisted, it would only lead to a loss of money for my family and me. Count yourself lucky, he said, as he sat back down and picked up a pen. I'm not reporting your mistake to any of my superiors. Do not make me regret giving you this break. Now get out of here before I change my mind. I made my way to the threshold. I faced him as I began to turn the knob. One question, I said. Most of the time, inmates come shipped here in groups. Anna arrived alone. Why was she given special treatment during her transport? Is she a celebrity, the daughter of a famous politician? It's within my rights to know as somebody who has to check up on her. Anna is my daughter, Buckley said as he scribbled on a pad in motion for me to leave. As time went on, I saw humanity behind the violent demeanor of many inmates. A common fear of correctional officers is susceptibility to manipulation by the incarcerated. I tried not to become a victim of my empathy. One of the prisoners named Aluko managed to escape. I collected information on how he did it. Rumors abounded that he had turned a toothbrush into a pig. He allegedly had weakened the concrete around his barred window. Another tale given was how he overpowered one of the correctional officers. The officer was too embarrassed to admit it, so they tried to cover it up. Aluko was a massive man. There was no shame in losing an unarmed combat match with him. The lack of weapons used left me baffled. The strangest part of the story was not how he escaped. It became obvious the inmates had some sort of intelligence. They were not as impulsive as we had judged them to be. They had the basic want of freedom, or the cruel entities that controlled them did. The most unsettling part of Aluko's fleeing was not how he had managed to scale the barbed wire, nor was it his willingness to traverse the tundra. What perplexed me the most was how his life had ended when he was less than half a mile away from the prison. It was not the elements that took him. Something had torn him apart. The theory of it having been a polar bear spread. They wanted a meal to go with their coke. One of the officers joked in the briefing room. I didn't find the lame quip funny, and neither did the warden. Our general lack of civility was not uncommon, but some jokes were intolerable. While many of us wrote it off as a polar bear attack, there was one aspect of the butchery not in alignment with that. Aluko's eyes are missing from his skull, a member of the search team said. Something carved an upside-down cross into its chest, or what was left of it. Medics came back and told us everything that they had seen. The brass took over the investigation shortly afterward. I asked one of the priests what could have ended his life. What kind of wraith-like being could perform such a precise and terrifying mutilation? I had asked. This has the makings of an attack by Azazel, the priest said. That particular type of demon wanders the wilderness. It can take many forms. Be on the lookout for anything resembling a goat. If you see horns when you're doing an outside perimeter check, be sure to recite a prayer and use this. He handed me a crucifix. My stubborn agnosticism did not want to accept it as a believable weapon. I relented because he was so polite. Buckley called us into his office, and when we got there, he didn't slam the door as I expected him to. Corrections Officer Nwusu and I gazed at each other with alarm as Buckley waved at us to follow him. He took us to an elevator in one of the back chambers that I had earlier dismissed as a room for the cleaning crew. An elevator was there. He opened it, had us step inside, and led us down to the basement. The subterranean cellar was completely barren except for two items. One was a stained glass window that depicted the Virgin Mary coated in ice. The second was an electric chair. I didn't know the prison had such a chamber. Everything about the seat looked old. It seemed to belong to a medieval era, rather than having come from decades ago. The arms of the chair had the faces of gargoyles at the ends of them. I've been talking to officers about this, he said. As a team, everybody is culpable except for me. The procedures we maintain of checking on the subjects every hour are important. It wasn't written as a flexible guideline. It exists for a reason. For an inmate to manage a successful escape attempt does not look good on us or the higher-ups in Rome. I don't know if you were lazy or scared to do your jobs, but either way, you need to toughen up and develop a work ethic. Otherwise, it's going to get ugly fast. I had the policy changed. Regardless of how understaffed we may be, you are not going to do 6 routine checks on the inmates every hour. If I hear a single complaint coming from your lips, you will regret it beyond measure. Are we clear? After a silence ensued, Buckley called us incompetent once more and dismissed us. Nuwusu took the elevator up. I turned around and spoke to Buckley. "Warden, I have a question. I did not permit you to ask one. I suppose after the beatdown I gave you, I'll allow it out of pity. Do any of the inmates have the demons driven out of them? And if so, where do they go afterward? Do they go back to the prison they came from? Are they granted immunity and allowed to go home? Do the exorcisms make them purer than what they were before?" "You are nothing more than pond scum with a badge," Buckley said with a sneer. "Don't ask questions if your wage doesn't merit it. How many times do I have to tell you?" "I was wondering because I haven't seen Anna in a while." "Watch what you say and get out of my face. You are a hairbreadth away from me documenting your insubordination." Although I loved pushing his buttons, I didn't want the negative consequences. I left the room. I did not yearn to be the newest execution there. I went up into one of the towers and I looked out at the expansive plains of frost and woodland. Buckley's threats and bullying were starting to get to me more than usual. Verbal abuse in my industry was not uncommon, but something about his irate tone under these conditions made it sting much worse. It filled me with a certain anger that I didn't know how to resolve. I figured getting some fresh air and doing a bit of investigating would help me stay preoccupied. I needed to clear my mind. Aluko's escape gave a negative impression of my work performance. I still refused to believe his death was some sort of natural phenomenon. I brought a sniper rifle with me, and I looked through the scope. The bullets had a cross carved into each one of them. I tried to trace the exact path that Aluko took when he made his final attempt at getting back into society. I carried a night vision device to help me see through the darkness. A half hour later, I saw movement. It was subtle at first. Snow fell from tree branches. My heart raced as I saw a figure wandering through a thick cluster of pines. It was a woman in a nightgown as white as the hills around her. Backward arching horns protruded from her forehead. The way she moved was peculiar. Her steps didn't seem to telegraph any sort of movement, as though she was floating. There were no indentations in the snow behind her. Her head tilted to the side. The last frozen feeling she wore on her face was one of pain. She seemed to suffer a sort of paralytic neck injury. A black-tailed deer was only 20 feet from her. She sneaked behind it, predatory. What I saw next disturbed me. The deer's torso opened. A crimson spurt littered the snow with puddles of red fluid. The ethereal woman reached down and tried to grab some of the eviscerated body parts. Her hands sunk through the chunks of meat. She wailed at the moment. I squeezed the trigger. It connected. Her chest tore, 2 sheets splitting open. Her scream became even more voluminous. She exploded like an effigy, incandescent in the Arctic. She evaporated into ashes. The flames went away and so did the spirit. A pile of blackened and smoldering embers got carried away by the wind. They decorated the trees as though it was a macabre Christmas stage setup. The next night, I visited Nuwusu in his room. His place was a mess. He was usually clean and organized. His few paperback books, sci-fi military adventures were strewn about on the floor. I noticed that he also had half a bottle of scotch in his nightstand, which was a definite violation. We weren't allowed to drink. The threat of an emergency forced us to maintain sobriety, but still I wasn't going to snitch on him. "I think I killed a demon," I said as I took a seat across from him. I searched high and low for the body and couldn't find it. One of the preachers told me that it was a particular type of evil called Azazel. I looked at Nuwusu and saw that his eyes seemed to stare out for 1,000 yards towards the ceiling. "What's wrong, man?" I asked. "I found the death ledger," he said. "I don't understand." Whoever flipped the switch on the electric chair we saw yesterday kept a logbook. Everybody whose life he ended. There have been exactly 106 people killed in that chair. Sure, some of them were repugnant before their possession. Others got locked up for a seatbelt violation. There's no consistency in regards to why they were worthy of capital punishment. Nuusu pulled out a manila volume, and he tossed it my way. I flipped through it and saw many names, some striking me as familiar. Do you have any suspicion they were killing people under our noses? No, I said. I searched the papers for dates to see how recent or old the incidents of annihilation were. All were within the last year. There was a weird energy in the electric chair room, Nuusu said. What you banished out in the woods may have been the spirit of an already possessed yet dead person. It's possible that when they're killed, their demonic selves stay on this plane. They could choose to haunt us. Could be every ghost story written since the beginning of time is the darker half of a human lingering. I must admit, I don't know who would want to stay in a place like this after all, though. I nodded. I also began to wonder if it was correct or if he was losing his sanity. I helped Aluko escape, Nuusu said as he turned to face me. The conditions of this place appall me. I want to assist many more. I have never seen a prisoner transported via helicopter. My 6 months of working at the facility had changed that. It landed on a helipad made of yellow and blue paint. The pilot and guard took the detainee out of the chopper. They were both army personnel. The stripes of their uniforms indicated that they were not low level within the military. As I watched this from one of the towers, I couldn't help but wonder who the new inmate was. The person tried to give the captors a struggle. Both were strong and didn't seem very worried. They kept the person under control. I observed these subjects' clothing during the escort down to the top floor of the cells. A black burlap sack was over their head. A large blanket covered them. It was impossible for me to even gauge the basic silhouette of the individual. I had seen many kinds of transport, but none so high profile. It made me contemplate if they were an insurgent from some faraway land. I pondered if they were a kingpin of some nefarious domestic terror group. I asked one of the other officers if they knew anything about the person. They told me the subject was in the hole, the most isolated cell in the grounds. Orders were not to take the burlap sack off of the person's head. This perturbed me a great deal. I asked if we had any information on the person. I already knew that the answer would be vague if there would be any sort of concrete backstory at all. I met the warden in one of the break rooms as he was eating steak. It was better than the freeze-dried and prepackaged artificial slop they gave to those of us lower in rank. I became jealous in a matter of seconds. You told us to watch the prisoners more, I said as I folded my arms. Who was looking out after the one in solitary? What makes them get room floors above the rest of the general population? Is this person the country's most prolific serial killer or something? What would merit such severe protections? I don't create the law here, he said with a mouthful. Believe it or not, I'm kept in the dark about a lot of the things as well. Don't assume because I'm not a grunt that I have all the details you so crave. Do me a favor when you get out of here next month. Take it up with the big guys in Italy, especially the one with the funny hat. I'm sure they would love to hear your thoughts. While you're there, tell them that I deserve a promotion. That same night, I went up to the top level and walked past the door that led to the solitary cell. Though I couldn't see inside because it was a wall of pure concrete, I did hear the wails of the prisoner. They sounded familiar. I was doing my routine checks and I passed one of the cells which had belonged to an inmate named Andre. He sat straight up and stared at me. I could tell something was different about him. He wasn't writhing on his cot, nor was he struggling with the usual muscle contractions. He walked up to me. The barrier between us didn't give me a perfect feeling of protection. "I am cured," he said. The usual milky pupils most of the inmates had been things that he was now devoid of. "You are doing much better," I said. "I've never seen anybody look as clear-headed as you do now. Not around here anyways. How are you feeling?" "Paranoid. Do you know what they do to people like me? After they've driven the evil out of us, they send us to a mega church in the Rockies. The church has its propaganda machine. They turn us into pamphlet writers or social media manipulators, missionaries for their so-called God. I would rather have Beelzebub as my host than be a door-to-door Bible salesman." "Who told you that?" "Your boss, Buckley." "I wouldn't worry about that. He tends to say a lot of mean things to get a rise out of people." "You don't understand. The transporting officers have told the other inmates the same thing. They can't all be on one big lie like that. No offense, but none of you are that organized. I won't argue with you there. They say that once we're sent to their cult-like compound, we must comply. If we refuse to work for the church, they put the demons back inside of us. They know how to weaponize those demons. It's not all about exercising them anymore if it ever was. It's about using them to control us." Andre's hand slipped through the metal food flap. He held a shank. The tip of the blade pierced through the midsection of my vest. I grabbed his wrist and wrestled the knife away from him until it clattered on the floor. I got a hold of the webbing of his hand and broke a few of his fingers, and I yelled for backup. Another officer came by and sprayed holy water into the slot. When it did nothing, we switched over to pepper spray and sent him to the ground. Inmates using dirty tricks and distractions to try and get one over on me was nothing new. That particular incident made me very spiteful and paranoid, though. When I controlled the cells the next day, Andre was nowhere to be found. I found that they had shipped him somewhere else. I wondered if it was to the nightmare place of forced worship that he had described. Nuwusu had lent me a copy of Milton's Paradise Lost. I felt obligated to give it back to him. After I had finished the last page, I went outside and knocked on Nuwusu's door. There was no answer. I went back into my room and I grabbed a flashlight. I walked up to the door again and banged on the barrier with the metal device. Even with the reverberation, Nuwusu still did not call out or come to the door. I had seen him fall into unhealthy habits which were worse for wear. His motivation to help people flee had gotten the best of him. His drinking had spiraled out of control due to the stress level that he was under. I kicked the door down. I couldn't tolerate the thought of letting him die by choking on his vomit after an intense bender. The room was empty and clean. None of his stuff was there. I walked into Buckley's office the next day. "One of the inmates smuggled a pistol in," I said. "Impossible," Buckley said as his eyes widened. "I need your help in assessing the cell, sir. There might be some ballistics evidence." "You believe that he used a gun?" "Yes," I said. I escorted Buckley to the chamber. It was a mess and items were strewn about everywhere. "Where's the gun?" I braced my knuckles with a small baton and punched Buckley in the temple. He fell. I took his service weapon and master keys. I walked out of the hallway and shut the door immediately. I waited for him to recover and come to, and when he did, he shook his head like he was waking up from a deep sleep, and he gazed at me with pure hatred. "What do you think you're doing, Lieutenant?" Buckley said as he touched the side of his head for blood. "I want you to tell me what happened to my best friend. No lies this time. Where did Nuwusu go? You do too much. Nothing worse than someone a kid picked on in high school who gets into this profession. They always overcompensate. Sometimes it's better to not be proactive. Wait till you get out of the field. You'll learn that lesson in an even harder way if you live that long. I'll tell the boys you gave a direct order to leave this level alone. You'll be here until you starve and dehydrate. I don't want to be cruel, but you need to start answering my questions or we're going to have problems. Who's the prisoner who came in cloaked the other day? Is it Nuuso? Is he possessed? Buckley glared at me and didn't answer. I stared down at the master keys. Last chance to tell me, I continued. I'm going to do my investigation if you don't help me. Screw off. There's something I will say though. Ever since Anna came here, they have changed some procedures. One on how those related to the officers get booked in here. Don't hate me, I don't make the rules. I wanted to ask him to elaborate, but I was getting angrier with him by the second. I left him there and went to solitary confinement. I went to the most isolated holding chamber on the property. When I opened the door, I found a yellow hallway that ended in darkness. I turned on my torch and walked down the vestibule with a hand on my service weapon. I found the prisoner in the corner, their hands tied to the bed, the burlap sack still over their face. I ripped it off. My wife stared back at me. Her face had cracked skin and was paler than I could ever remember. I stumbled backward at the sight of her. No, I said through gritted teeth. As the dawn of my new reality had cascaded over me, I punched the wall. I broke a few knuckles too. I knew what I had to do. I undid the restraints of the bedding and zip-tied her wrists together. I did not want the presence which controlled her to fight me. You never told me you were in a gang that used to rob innocent people, she said as I led her down the hallway. Her voice was not my wife, but sounded the way an actress might on scrambled television. I brought her to the first level. I walked her past prison bar doors after I used the master keys to gain access to them. It was snowing when we went outside. Where are you going? I turned around and saw an officer that I had met many times. Michael Patterson had the face of a bulldog. He never allowed anyone to think that he was anything but a consummate professional. Humor was something that he was incapable of. The most powerful priest is out on sick leave, I said. He's possessed himself. I have direct orders to take her to the city. I'm going to drive her to one of the churches there. Did Buckley give you any paperwork authorizing this? It's in the prisoner transport vehicle over there, I said, pointing at the SUV 300 feet away. Let me get her situated for the drive and I'll be right back with it. Patterson nodded and gave a tacit approval. Once we were in the car, I hit 60 miles per hour and drove far away from that wretched place. It took 2 weeks to get back to our home state. I returned to my house in the middle of the night so the neighbors wouldn't see my wife in the state that she was in. The next morning, I restrained her to her bed. I went to the local church and managed to convince a priest to help me. I had to persuade Father Park that I was not a delusional person. When he arrived in our bedroom, he knew the case was legitimate. Park performed a lengthy 7-hour exorcism. I walked him to the door. My wife had already become lucid again. She didn't have any memories of what led her to being in my workplace. I have tried to pray and purify this house, Park said as I opened the front door. If I were you, I would consider moving. As the priest walked up to his car, I got his attention again by calling out his name. Father, I said, I've been meaning to ask, how do we protect ourselves from possession so I can ensure that this never happens again? And demons are like falsehoods, Park said. No matter how intelligent you may be, you could fall victim to believing something not based on facts. We have to guard ourselves against lies and deception. In the same way, we have to always be at the ready when our senses tell us that something evil is afoot. I closed the door and went upstairs, and I embraced my wife. How did the assignment go? She asked. I'm changing industries. It was cold every day, though I assume that's the case whenever you spend every day in a research facility in the Arctic. They told us we were here to record the ice sheets' sizes as they shrank. but I'm not entirely sure why. I've seen the Facebook feeds of all the doulards and Philistines. They don't believe us. Social policy doesn't shift to meet us and our findings. No one cares. Still, there we were, freezing our respective genitals off in ridiculously low temperatures. That's alright, Karen. Please finish your latte and tell me exactly how it is. You know better than us. Go on, seriously. I think it's a bit funny that we were sent up here on federal grants from the good old USA. You may not believe our findings, but you sure are paying for them. So, there it is. That's not all we were up there for, though. It seems that was what we were doing at first, but as we began to record crazy seismic activity, our focus shifted to that instead. Initially, it seemed as though it was just periphery nonsense that we were picking up on our instruments, but it continued. The government suits came in and we worked under the mushroom style of management the US government enjoys implementing most. Feed your employees crap and keep them in the dark. We were already working on the government dime, so not much changed. Everything just felt a lot more hush-hush. It had been at least a week since the last transmission, and the storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. We all knew that. The animals knew it too. The sled dogs became lethargic and whimpered as we checked in on them. They would pace and refuse to touch their kibble. Things got weird outside sometimes though, just the way that it goes. Sometimes you think you see things in the snow and then you turn back to look at it and it's nothing. But sometimes it is. I'm getting carried away with myself when I talk of such things. I apologize. The thing that gets me more than anything is the wild loneliness you feel. It's maddening some days, but I suppose that should have been something to be prepared for. I'm not so sure any amount of preparation would have done it though. You expect the loneliness, to be sure, but the thing you really don't expect is exactly how crazy your own mind goes in it. You know there won't be enough people to sate the average human equivalent, but the worst is within you. It's enough to drive you up a wall. I am rambling though, so I'll get on with it. We were a team of 11 in the beginning, but during the shift rotation, we were left with 5. Me, that is, Andrew Warden, a junior researcher, Anthony Finkel, the lead, Jennifer Jones, another junior, Amber Darling. Not sure how someone ends up with a surname like that, and a helicopter pilot. Donovan Plant, technical officer sent in after the pickup in seismic. He notably came from a military background, and it felt as though he was deeper in the government's pocket than anyone else. There we were, expecting another round of professionals to come in, and that dang storm came down on us almost like it knew what it was doing. The weather itself knew that we would be trapped up there, and we lost communication. But that didn't matter, as we knew they wouldn't bring the next batch of fresh-faced researchers with the storm the way it was. It never seemed to let up. A constant whistle blew across the metal panels that made up the front entrance of the facility. You could get further away from the noises of the storm if you delved deeper into the facility underground. It was warmer there too, and for a brief moment, maybe you could forget you were on top of the world in the middle of a blizzard. We hardly talked to one another, only congregating in the mess hall to eat together, normally in muttering silence. Mostly, I devoured books that I had already read, and the other team members were taken away in their own hobbies. The storm bugged most of our equipment out, so it wasn't as though we could get much work done beyond recording temperature and making sure the seismograph kept a steady reading. Anthony tended his bonsai, Amber knitted, Jennifer tended to the dogs, and Donovan kept his door shut and locked, so I couldn't really say what he did in there while the rest of us were filling our time. The first meaningful conversation I had had in a long time was with Jones as we were peers. It was in the sterile mess hall as I attempted to keep an eye on the open page of Metamorphosis, while also spooning hunks of chopped spaghetti into my mouth. I was doing a rather poor job of this, constantly dropping sauce into my lap. She slid into the seat across from me with a bowl, rubbing her hands together after removing her gloves. I couldn't help it. My interest was piqued. "Why the gloves?" I rumbled while closing the book and looking up at her. Her cheeks were veiny red. Jones lifted her warm bowl with her hands, letting out a satisfying sigh. She peeked over the bowl at me. "Have you been out lately?" I leaned in. "No, there's a storm out there, in case you've not noticed." "I know." She set the bowl down. "Still, I think you should go outside sometime. I swear there's something out there." She shuddered as she spooned the food into her mouth and sucked on her spoon absently. "What are you talking about?" I raised an eyebrow. She grinned and leaned in towards me. "There are people out there, I swear it. You've got to go out there. I'll take you. You've got to see them." "There's no one out there." I furrowed my brow at her, completely forgetting my book and setting it next to me on the bench. She pointed her spoon at me. "You sure about that? You've been up there." I shook my head. "I'll show you tomorrow." She took another mouthful from the bowl. "Don't tell anyone." Jones whispered this part and decided to continue her meal alone in her room. As she left the canteen and disappeared down the hall, I watched her, baffled. "What?" I said. "There weren't people out in the storm. What sort of asinine crap was that?" I wrapped my fingertips across the tabletop and wondered whether Jones had a touch of the madness. That was a distinct possibility. It could creep up on any one of us at any time. Wandering around in a blizzard was a way for it to manifest. I took my bowl to the sink basin and washed it, leaving it on the rack to dry. After returning to my room, I tossed the book onto the metal bedside table and I lied in bed. Even after clicking my light off, I couldn't sleep though. I paced for longer than I'd care to admit, thinking that I ought to turn Jones into Fink. Fink would know what to do. He was a brilliant yet compassionate man. Would we quarantine her? I couldn't be sure. None of us knew when the next batch would show up. Call it curiosity, boredom. Perhaps I too had been touched by the maddening effects that the place kept. I decided to meet with Jones in the morning and go out there. After making my decision, sleep came easier. The following morning, I bundled in layers and crept past the others' rooms, then the canteen. I could hear clanking utensils as they ate their breakfast. Reaching the mouth of the facility, I found Jones at the sled dog pens, roughing the neck of a shabby-looking mutt with curly black and white fur. He looked around happily, wagging his tail. The storm picked up outside and he tucked his tail as the overhead fluorescent lights flickered. "It's okay, boy," said Jones, offering her hand to palm down. He brushed his face into it, and she gathered his head in both hands, scratching his jaw on either side. His tongue rolled back and forth. "So," I said, making my presence known. "People outside, huh?" "That's right," she said. "I saw them a few days ago." Jones lifted herself from her hunkered position and wiped her hands down on the front of her pants. "I thought for sure I was losing my mind, but they are out there. Humanoid figures." "You mean humans? Humanoid figures don't exist," I corrected. "Sure, humans. I saw them a few days ago and tried ignoring them, but every time I look out there..." She motioned to the window near the facility's arched doorway. I couldn't see anything but thick snow whipping across the glass's surface in violent bouts. They were out there. The figures are the only thing I can't rationalize. "That's impossible." "Without a doubt. It's totally impossible," Jones said. So, They're still out there. She shrugged. If you ask me, governmental experimentation. What? Hear me out. She put up her hands with a coy twinkle of her immaculate teeth. Probably I'm paranoid or something. Probably I'm totally wrong, alright? But I think this is some sort of localized blizzard. I think the government is testing out weaponized weather. That's what makes sense to me. Given the look in her eye, I could tell she was mostly joking. There was something like a hopeful glimmer there though, and I could tell the thought of something so sensational moved the gears of her imagination. That's illegal. I shook my head. Lots of things are illegal. When the government does something, it's not. I've seen your file. You've worked in the public sector long enough, so I would say you know that better than anyone. Localized, weaponized weather, I said, holding my chin and tugging at the thin beard transpiring there. Letting the words dangle in the air, that way they would fully cement in my mind. That's insane. You're insane. She laughed heartily, flapping her gloves against her bundled tummy. I mean, probably. Doesn't change the fact that I've seen humans. Right. It doesn't change the fact that I've seen humans out there. She paused to slip into her thick gloves. So, I tried going out to them yesterday, but no matter how far I went, I couldn't see their details. They look like black outlines in the snow. So I need your help. I needed someone else to come with me. I don't want to get lost out in that storm. You want to get both of us lost in the storm. At least if that happens, I won't be lost by myself, right? This was a death wish. Without a doubt, I was sure of that. But why had I come up here? I knew why, and she knew why too. The talk of these strange figures out in the blizzard had me extremely interested. I moved across the white-dusted floor and wiped at the window near the door with my glove, scraping the frost off. I peered out, squinting my eyes. I waited for it. I waited for the humanoid figures to show themselves out there. Nothing. I couldn't see anything out there in that storm but wild white wind. Just as I began to tell Jones that I intended to have breakfast with the others, I saw them standing out there, unmoving. There was maybe 2 or 3 of them, the vaguest outlines of people. Arms, legs, heads. No way. There was no way I should have been able to see anything in that. Unless the storm was localized somehow, and the reach of the blizzard didn't touch out past maybe 40 yards. 40 yards, listen to me. 40 yards in a blizzard that thick might as well have been a million. Jones came up on my shoulder. You see them too, huh? I jerked at her presence and took a step back from the window. Yeah, I see them. It could be a simple case of pareidolia, I offered. She nodded. Could be. It could be several things. Pareidolia, cabin fever, polar madness specifically. And believe me, I've thought about all of that. The only thing that's supposed to be out there is the chopper. I don't know about you, but those don't look anything like a chopper to me. I studied Jones's face and saw she was on point. Her brow was rigid, and her eyes were unmoving. She was determined. Re-pulling her hair into a tighter bun, she donned a thick woven cap. Ready? Gosh dang it. I slapped my gloves against my hands, but eventually slid into them. She grabbed the door handle as I was still placing the goggles over my face. Remember to stay close. The worst thing we can do is lose each other out there. She paused. I set up a line yesterday. It goes out maybe 20 or 30 meters. It was difficult alone. Twisting the door's big flat metal handle with the full weight of her body, it came swinging in and I was immediately met with the stiff wind of the blizzard. Even in my layers, I knew it was going to be a miserable excursion. I barreled into the wind with my shoulder, feeling the chill cut straight through me. Gritting my teeth, I reached out with a stiff arm, searching the blind white air for the lead that she had mentioned. It was a panicked eternity that I was reaching out with my gloved fingers before I felt them wrap around the hard metal of a waist-high post. Running the length of the guidepost, I found the line and took it in both hands. This was it. If I let go and scrambled into the whipping snow, I'd be lost forever. Behind, I felt the searching arms of Jones. She was flailing around, keeping one hand in the line. I grabbed a hold of her with the other, leading her hand to it. Quickly, I grasped onto the line again, terrified. It's a similar feeling of drowning, total hopelessness all around you. I shimmied my feet along, creating a small path in the heavy snow. Why did I have to go first? I felt my neck against the wind beating against my frayed hood as I came to the end of the line and peered out into the storm, holding one hand cupped around my face to help me see. They were the figures, strong, unmoving. They must have been statues. That was the only explanation. Something was moving us along out there in that storm. Something wanted us out there. Something wanted us to find these things. I felt Jones bump into my back and grab my shoulder, looking past me. There, you can see them a little clearer now. She yelled directly into my ear. Even with the minimal space between us, I could scarcely hear her over the scream of the wind. Are they statues? I asked. They look like it. It's clearer out today. I'm going to go check them out. Hold on to the end of the line and keep me in sight. If you lose me, get help. I let go of her and staggered into the snow before she could protest. Looking back even now, I wonder what was wrong with me. No one goes out there like that alone. That's a surefire way to kill yourself. I didn't care, I suppose. I was driven by a sense of adventure in an otherwise mind-numbing existence. The storm continuously pushed against me, and I fought it, watching my feet steadily. I could already feel my muscles burning from the exertion, but I convinced myself that if I maintained my nerves and didn't lose my sense of direction while taking my steps carefully, I'd be fine. And that's when I bumped directly into one of the figures and almost set myself cartwheeling in the snow. I instead found myself on one knee, leaning over the obscured form of a humanoid figure. It didn't move. It was frozen. I held on to the stiff leg of the figure and looked to my left and right. 3 other frozen figures to my left, 2 others to the right, and then there was the one that I was kneeling over. 6 altogether. Humanoid forms of varying heights and builds. I felt a hand grab my shoulder hard, and I almost fell over in terror as I was sure that was one of these figures had come to life, and it was coming to get me. It was Jones. She had left the line. "What are you doing?" I screamed at her. "Finkel's at the end of the line over there." She spit through the cold. "He said to come and get you. Looks like the jig is up." Could I almost hear a laugh in her voice? Who knows? I relaxed and took a moment to regroup. "Help me." "What?" she said. "Help me. Get this thing's leg over there. I've got this one." We set about the arduous task of dragging the frozen figure through the thick snow, only circling around in confusion once. We saw Fickle at the end of the line, holding a light and waving it all around. "There!" screamed Jones. As we met Fickle, he called out gruffly, "What the heck are you doing out here?" "Here," I said. "Help us get this thing in." It was hard to tell, but I'm sure the lead was shaking his head as he hunkered down and began aiding in our efforts to move the heavy statue-like figure. Darling slammed the door shut and the wind outside was muffled. I shed my hood and goggles and gloves, rubbing my hands together while blowing hot breath into them. I watched as Jones followed suit, A figure lay on the floor, stiff with both arms at its sides, staring at the ceiling blindly. It was ice. It was an ice statue. I looked around at the other faces of the research team, and they too were all momentarily intrigued by the statue. Finkel tugged at his belt. "Now why don't you tell me what you two were doing out there during a dang blizzard?" I looked at Jones and we locked eyes. "We saw those things out there," she said. "There are others out there. This isn't the only one. Wild stuff if you ask me." "And you thought you could just go on a little trek without letting the rest of us know?" stammered Finkel, while stroking his thick, peppered beard. "Have you lost your minds?" Still shaking his head, he crossed the room and knelt to examine the ice statue. When he looked back at us, his expression had softened substantially. All right. You see this thing out there and go get it. What now?" Jones shrugged and made the noise for, "I don't know." "This will be going into my folder, sir," said Donovan to Finkel. Finkel waved this off. "I'm sure it will. Everything does, doesn't it?" He lifted the light from his belt and shined it at the statue's bulbous, featureless face. "This isn't made out of ice," he said calmly. "It's coated in the stuff." He sighed and wiped his dribbling nose with a sniff. "There's a person under there. God dang it. There's a person under there." He repeated his words. I stepped over to look at the figure. It was true. With him shining his light into the thing's face, I could just make out the two blue eyes, an open mouth, and nose. There was a human somewhere under all that, no doubt. "Jesus," whispered Darling. "Who is it?" None of us could tell, as the glass-like reflective quality of its form did not afford the distinction of specific features. Finkel investigated the body with his coarse, thick fingers. "Never seen anything like this before. It looks like somebody poured water over them and kicked them out into the blizzard. God, look at this. The coating of ice is so thick. How does something like this happen?" Mine and Jones' insubordination seemed forgotten, at least for the moment. I looked at her, but her eyes were transfixed on the statue. This wasn't the sort of thing she had been looking for. This was horrific. This was death. Who did that? What did that? We lifted the statue and carried it to the infirmary, laying it out on one of these sleek metal tables, surrounding it with heaters. Not wanting to watch the thing melt, I took myself to the canteen and settled into a corner with a warm butter biscuit. I hadn't noticed, but Jones had followed me, startling me from my thoughts as I looked over my sparse breakfast. "You said you thought it was some sort of localized storm," I said. "I don't know. It seemed like a neat fantasy." She toyed with her fingers on the table. "I was bored, that's all. I didn't think those figures out there were even real. The idea of a top-secret governmental conspiracy got me excited, but I knew that was a tad far-fetched." Jones sighed. "Of course it was. I was bored." Her voice had an apologetic tone. "Plus, I had to have a reason to get you to come with me." "It's all right," I assured her. "It's a good thing we did what we did. There are frozen dead people out there, and at least 5 others. Darling joined us, sliding onto the bench table alongside Jones. "Craziest stuff I've ever seen. That much I can tell you." She was shaking her head. "Finkel says we should go out there and get the others." She studied me and Jones. "You share our grim duo." Darling cracked a grin. "What do you guys think? There's some cereal freezer out there, right? A Jack Frost type, and going around and blasting people with a freeze ray or some stuff." "There you go, Jones," I said. "There's your top-secret government experiment. They've got a freeze ray." Jones' mouth blinked a smile. It was a crummy situation for all of us. We were trying to keep our spirits up, I think. No easy task when there's a dead body in the other room. Darlene withdrew a deck of cards and I watched as the two women played a game of war. Their chatter filled the canteen and I was left thinking about that poor frozen soul in the infirmary. Who was it? Why were there frozen people out there in the blizzard? Why were they so eerie? Finkel entered the room and took it next to me, putting his hands over one another on the table. He stroked his beard and stared at the reflective surface of the bench table. "What's up, Fink?" asked Darlene. He sighed. "It's Jensen." It took us a moment to realize what he was saying. Dr. Donald Jensen was one of the researchers that had left our facility days prior to the shift change. How is that possible? We had been in communication with the leaving team members up until the blizzard hit. They had already boarded the plane that would take them home. We had all said bye to one another over the radio. As far as we all knew, they were already back home. So, how is it that Jensen was sitting dead in the infirmary? He should have been hundreds of miles away. Well, Jones tossed her hand of cards onto the table, letting them splatter across the hard surface. "I guess you were right, Andrew. Those are humans out there for sure." Finkel drummed his thumb against his leg. "I suppose we should gather their bodies. This time, though," he glanced at me and Jones, "we'll do it right." So, it was that we gathered the other 5 statue people out of the thick storm outside, and tilting them over so that we could more easily drag them along the ground like stiff boards. Donovan stood in the doorway, ushering and cheerleading us as me and the other 3 did the heavy lifting. None of us were surprised at the thawed faces we had found, after laying them out with the heaters in the infirmary. It was the other half of our team. 6 people frozen to death. I've seen people lose fingers or toes to the cold, all black and brittle. I've even seen people receive permanent damage on their noses or ears from it. This was different though. They were frozen, but they had not lost the colors they had in life. It was uncomfortable to look at them. Considering Joan said she had seen them out there over the past few days, their skin should be unrecognizable. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill frostbite. Me and the rest of the living members of the team didn't mention it, opting instead to cast unsettled glances at one another. Finkel and Donovan took care of the bodies once they had softened, covering them in blankets and arranging them in the infirmary in a perfect line against the far wall from the door. "Craziest stuff I've ever seen," Darlene said repeatedly. Jones, I think, felt guilty, and I attempted to comfort her, patting her on the shoulder. She gave me a stiff smile. "It's not your fault, you know that, right?" "I know," she said, her lips pulled tight. "I just wish I would have said something earlier." "Yeah," said Darlene. "Without you, they would still be out there." We gathered in the canteen and shared in the chore of cooking. Strangely enough, the deaths of our team members did not settle a morbid silence over the room like I thought it would. If anything, the tragedy had strengthened our bonds, and the canteen was filled with the smell of food and the noise of friendly conversation. Finkel disappeared and returned with a bottle of wine, popping the top and pouring us all glasses. We toasted to the dead and ate, played cards, talked about anything besides the corpses. Just as Finkel yawned himself out of the mess hall and Donovan soon followed, I realized that I was the third wheel in a game between Darlene and Jones. We continued to play cards and broke into the cooking sherry, with our teeth stained red and Jones and Darlene fondling each other's fingertips. I removed myself with a quick "good night," received with little protest. I returned to my room and stripped to my thermals, and then fell asleep on a full warm stomach with a dizzy brain. I awoke to a biting chill in my room. Reaching for the bedside lamp and finding it dead, I sat up in my mess of blankets. After rummaging around in the drawer near the bed, I found a flashlight and turned it on. I could see my own breath in the cutting beam of light. Crap. I said aloud and reached for my clothes near the bed. Bundling up, I stumbled sleepily into the hall, squinting in the darkness with my guiding light. As I was wiping sleepers from my eyes, my light caught the surprised face of Donovan, and he spun around, swinging his arms and letting out a yelp. I caught his wild hand and it was bone cold. "Hey," he said, pushing the glasses up on the bridge of his nose and shirking his arm out of my grasp. "Power's out." "Yeah, any idea why?" "I don't know, I just woke up." "Me too." Darlene pushed her head from her bunk room, yawning. "Jesus, it's freezing." She was stripped down to her undies and hid behind the bulky door. "Oh," she said, looking at me and Donovan standing in the hall. "What's with the power?" Jones emerged from Darlene's room as well, wrapped in a quilt, peering at us from behind the other woman, and covering her eyes as I shone the light in their direction. "Quit it. Shine that somewhere else, please." I did. Finkel's grumbling voice could be heard from the far end of the hallway leading deeper into the facility. "Someone's cut the main line," he said, eyeing each of us suspiciously on his approach. "Don't look at me," said Donovan. "I just woke up." "Us too," said Jones and Darlene in unison. I yawned my answer and then caught myself. "Hey, Fink, what were you doing down there anyway?" "I was checking the breakers. Was going to see if I could find a way to flip the power back on once I had noticed it was off. But someone cut straight through the line." "What about the backup, Jenny?" I asked. "Busted to crap. Looks like somebody beat it with a hammer," he said while shaking his head. Our ghostly breaths hung in the air as we all looked around the hallway. Was it possible that one of us had sabotaged our own life support? That couldn't have been it. No, we were all a bit jumpy from the frozen corpses, that was all. That's what made sense. Finkel circled his finger in the air. "Everyone, to the mess room." We settled into the bench tables in the canteen, gathering candles from the cupboards, lighting them, and placing them throughout the room so that everything cast long, dancing shadows. The wind outside only seemed to pick up, and although the place was lit in a warm glow, we were all chattering and shivering against a ticking clock. "So, who's your money on there, Fink?" asked Darlene. "If I had to guess, I'd say it's your military boy over there." She motioned to Donovan, who clenched his jaw and tapped his foot. "Oh yeah?" said Donovan. "Wouldn't surprise me if it was you. You're the only one here as a freelance contractor." "What the heck does that have to do with anything?" asked Darlene. "You're the weirdo that holes up in his room all day." "Think," said Donovan. "Why would I cut the power? I'm here too, I need heat." He rubbed his arms. "It's freaking freezing. You really think that I would hurt myself just to freeze you out? Are you crazy?" She mocked his protest, jabbering her hand in a pantomime fashion. "Regardless," said Finkel, "we're all here now. The power's out, someone cut it. I can't imagine why any one of us would. Comms had been down for days and days now, so I can't fathom why whoever did it would add freezing to death to the list of things we have to worry about. I don't think any of us did it." He settled his lower back against the kitchen counter. "Why would we?" "Maybe it was one of them," said Jones. We all knew what she meant. One of the frozen corpses we had hauled out of that terrible blizzard. "Now's not the time for your wild imaginings, Jones," said Finkel while holding up his hand. "I mean it," said Jones. "Those things give me the heebie-jeebies." "Those things," I said, "are our team members, in case you've forgotten." Jones glanced at me, and I saw the injury in her eyes. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant..." Her voice faltered and fell off. "Thinking Andrew's right," said Donovan. "Dead people aren't getting up and cutting our power. Don't be ridiculous." Darlene chimed in. "Oh yeah, I think Donovan's right. He would know, considering he's probably the one that did it." Donovan shook his head. "Are you dense? We've gone over this. I would freeze too. Are you stupid, or do you just like to pick fights for no reason?" Darlene stood, pointing a finger at Donovan. "I know you're a creep. I've seen the way you look at me and Jen. You probably got a few marbles loose from that tour in Iraq. Saw some stuff over there, didn't you? Now you thought you would cut the power and take us out in our sleep. I've seen guys like you before. Totally normal, and then one day, you flip a switch and then bam." She snapped her fingers. "You murder an entire group of people." Her hand came down on the table in a swift smack. Donovan sat slowly, dumbfounded, mouth agape. "That's enough," said Finkel, crossing his arms. "It's cold, Notlin. It's only going to get colder." I glanced at the thermometer. 7 degrees Celsius. I guessed it would drop below zero within the hour. "We need to insulate this room. If we stay together, we'll be warmer, if only a little." He too looked at the thermometer, shaking his head and checking the watch on his wrist. "Gather up blankets, pillows, coats, scarves, anything and everything that might retain some heat." "What about the dogs?" asked Jones. "What about them?" asked Donovan. "Forget them, they're dogs, they've got fur." "Don't be like that," I spoke up. "Don't be like what?" asked Donovan in a harassed way. "She's over here talking about me cutting the power." He motioned to Darlene. "And now her little girlfriend is worried about some dumb animals. Am I dreaming, or is everybody losing their dang minds?" "We'll bring the dogs in," said Finkel, adding, "More warm bodies that way." "I guess that makes sense," grumbled Donovan. "Someone had to explain it to you in order for you to show a little compassion," I asked. "I guess I'm the bad guy," he said. "No one's the bad guy," said Finkel, stroking his peppered beard. We bundled into coats, jackets, gloves, and our respective rooms and returned to the canteen with piles of blankets and pillows. Darlene and Jones took up a post nearest the kitchen area. I bedded down near the doorway leading into the hall a few feet from Finkel. Donovan sulked in the far corner. The two women left to gather the dogs. I offered to help, but they assured me they would be fine. I gathered a few nearby lit candles to stave off the chill permeating the room, and tried cracking open Metamorphosis again. Finkel cut this short, talking to me in a hushed whisper. I glanced at Donovan to be sure he wasn't listening. "What do you think?" he asked. "About?" I asked, setting the book to the side. "About all of this. I don't know, I think it's cold. You know what I mean. Between you and me, I think one of us cut the power. I know it wasn't me." "Well, how do you know it wasn't me?" I asked him. He wheezed out a small chuckle, keeping his voice low. "That is exactly why I don't think it's you," he said. "Really?" I cracked a grin. "I haven't entirely ruled you out as a suspect either, boss man." He shifted and pulled up the hood of his parka and withdrew something from one of his inner coat pockets. I caught the shine of a flask and heard him unscrew it. He took a swig and offered it to me. "It won't actually warm you up, but it'll help you forget that you're cold." I took it and sipped and then passed it back to him. "Geez, that's rank stuff." He chuckled. "More for me then." He took a healthy drink and rescrewed the top, placing it somewhere within all those layers. "I think it's Donovan," he sighed. "I'm trying to keep everyone calm, but I really think it's him." I raised my brow. "Really?" Why? Tell me. Finkel shrugged. I trust you. The woman returned with the 6 sled dogs in tow. The pitter-pattering animals scrambled through the canteen, pushing their wet noses in every corner, sniffing. The black and white, curly-furred dog came straight up to me, sticking its paws directly onto my lap and pressing its face into my neck. I could hear its heavy breathing as it smelled me. Hey there, Steve, calm down. I pushed him down a little, and he settled near my feet, resting his eyes and exhaling softly. The wind continued to batter against the facility, and every so often, one of the dog's ears would perk up in attention, and then settle back down upon the realization that it was only the wind. Donovan settled into his corner with his back against a wall, and watched the rest of us over the top of a book. Jones and Darling played cards while Finkel snored beside me. I wrapped my arms around my midsection and tried to drift off to sleep. Steve, the mutt, curled up beside me, and I threw a series of blankets over me and him. Good boy, I whispered into his ear. With some effort, I drifted into a sweating sleep without dreams. When I awoke, it was to the door to the canteen opening and closing. The noise of the door shutting in its frame creaked. I almost chalked it up to any other noise in my half-asleep bundle. Upon the realization of what it was, I stirred awake, startling Steve, and sending him into an alert, standing position. I looked around at the candlelit room. Finkel still snored. I blinked a few times and could see Jones, Big Spooning Darling, both dead to the world. Bingo. Donovan was gone. I shook Finkel and he opened his eyes with a snort. What? He said, eyes darting around wildly. Donovan. I pointed to the strewn mess of blankets in the corner. He's gone. Dang it. He shuffled to his feet and moved across the floor, shaking the woman until they groaned and arose. The other sled dogs watched him with mild interest, barely raising their heads to look his way. The research lead checked his watch. It's morning anyway. He was right, but it didn't feel like any of us had gotten enough sleep. I took my flashlight and cracked open the door to the hallway with Steve at my feet, peeking into the blackness. The others came over to the entrance of the canteen. I knew he was up to something, said Darling. I know it. Keep a cool head and don't jump to any conclusions, Finkel reminded. I pressed the door open and stepped into the hall with the others filing out with me. Where do you think he went? I asked to any one of them, hoping they would know. Here, I'll go with Darling and you go with Jones, said Finkel. Check deeper in the facility and we'll head towards the entrance. I nodded this affirmation, and I could see Darling begin to open her mouth and protest, surely wanting to go with Jones, but Fink shot her a look that I couldn't quite catch. Darling clicked on her own light and they started off towards the entrance. Me and Jones were left there, watching them go until they met the set of stairs leading up at the end of the hall. You don't actually think Don's up to something, do you? Asked Jones as we began our way deeper into the dead-freezing underground facility. I shrugged. Who knows? Hey, I know Darling's a bit harsh towards him and all, but I can't imagine that anyone on this team would actually try and kill any one of us. I could barely catch her hopeful, childish eyes in the periphery of my flashlight's glow. He's a bit of an ass, but I don't think he's evil. Why does she hate him so much? I heard a soft sigh. She was married once to a military guy. She stopped me, grabbing my shoulder. Don't you tell her that I told you this, okay? Okay, I assured. They were really happy when they were dating teenagers. Years. The way she tells it is that her ex-husband was a really nice guy until he joined the army. There was a moment's pause as we continued at our turtle's pace, me shining my light into the depth of the hallway. After he came out of basic, he was worse. He apparently used to be a real soft-hearted young man. The military hardened him, turned him into a big callous. From the way that Joan spoke, I could decipher that she was repeating words once told to her. He became a control freak, wouldn't let her leave the house, wouldn't let her talk to friends or family. She felt all alone. And then he started hitting her, and no one was around for her to tell because of the way he had closed her off. I shook my head, keeping my eyes straight ahead. Dang. Yeah. Just then, some dark shadow darted across the circular beam of my light, and I choked on my own spit, stopping my feet abruptly and putting up an arm so Jones wouldn't walk past. You see that? See what? She craned her neck forward, scanning the dark hallway ahead. You didn't see that. No, are you sure you did? Got a touch of the madness, huh? Cabin fever or something. I could sense a smile beginning in her voice as she spoke the last word. But just as the thing darted across the hallway again, I could feel her stiffen in her place next to me. Holy crap. Her voice was frantic. You saw it that time, didn't you? I said this with more than just a smidge of arrogance. What was it? I didn't catch a good look at the thing. Hey! I shouted up ahead. I've got a gun. A lie, but I hope that it sounded convincing. You better come on now if you don't want to get shot. That last sentence came out more like a quiver as the thing darted across again. I hadn't thought it was possible to feel colder in those sub-zero temperatures. But as the thing spoke in the darkness, I swear the blood in my body froze and threatened to harden me like those dead corpses we had brought in. It mocked my voice. I've got a gun. In a hissing voice. Quickly, I shot the light all around, hoping to catch the thing and see what it was. No matter how I tried, I could not find the thing. I've got a gun, it said again. Screw you, said Jones in a panic. I could feel her begin to shift and turn to run, but I grabbed a hold of her arm. I couldn't move from my position, and I was holding onto anything like a drowning person. Let's go, Jones' voice cracked. Let's go, said the thing in a squeal. Jones shoved me so that I collided with the wall and I was broken from my spell. She was already pelting down the hall, away from me and the thing. I slipped into a sprint, pumping my legs until I could feel the fire there growing. My warm breath clung around my scarf as I panted and ran. She disappeared from the light that I held outstretched. Jones was gone, and no matter how quickly I moved, I never seemed to catch up to her. The clatter of nails against the floor scratched behind, and I dared not to look there. I didn't stop until I came to the door leading to the canteen, and the noise of the creature behind was no longer audible. Darling and Finkel were there, bathed in darkness. I pounded my chest a bit with my fist, attempting to get my breathing under control. Darling didn't even wait for me to catch my breath before peppering me with questions. Where's Jones? What happened? Where'd she go? My hands went numb. What do you mean? She didn't meet you guys. I scanned the dark hallway and shone my light back the way that I had come. There was nothing there. There was someone chasing me. She went up ahead and I lost her. I refused to meet their eyes. She should have met you guys before me. Silence lingered between us all, and I could hear the crinkle of Darling's gloves as she squeezed her hands together. Are you sure you didn't miss her? I pleaded. We haven't seen another living soul, said Finkel. Not since we split up. He shook his head and looked down. I spun. Jones! I cried out, and the name echoed back at me from the depths of the facility. Hey, Jones! I felt a hard hand on my shoulder, and I turned to find Darling there squeezing me. "Don't panic." She gave me a smile, and for the briefest of moments, it honestly felt genuine. "It's gonna be alright, don't panic. We'll find her. Knowing Jen, I'm sure she just got lost in the dark." Feeling myself nod along, I said, "Yeah, you're right. That's exactly something she would do." "So," said Fink, "Don and Jones are both missing now. We pulled our other dead team members out of the storm." He stroked his beard and shook his head. It was his turn to avert his eyes from ours. "This is frickin' rough. Pardon the French." Darling ignored his words and turned back to me. "You said something was chasing you." "That's right. Something in the dark, deeper in the facility. I couldn't move, it scared me so bad. And then Jones snapped me out of it and disappeared." "What was it?" she asked. Fink's interest piqued as well as they both stared directly at me, awaiting my explanation. But the only thing that I could offer was a small shrug. "What did it look like?" "I didn't get a good look at the thing," I said. "Come on." Fink opened the door to the canteen and slipped in, saying, "Better to keep warm. Probably safer too. If she comes back, it'll be better that we're here." As we sat at one of the bench tables with these sled dogs shifting to lay at our feet, Steve clung to Darlene's side, keeping his snout buried under her hand. Darlene's knees bobbed wildly under the table, and I could see that tears were beginning to well in her eyes. I wanted to reach out and apologize. I told them of the thing that we had encountered deeper within the facility. It was a humanoid creature of some kind, I concluded. It seemed to be toying with us, like it was a joke. Its voice, I grimaced. Its voice was like a mischievous little elf or something. I know that's ridiculous to say. Fink hung on every word, and Darling rested her head against an arm propped by an elbow on the table. The lead researcher sat there, tugging at his beard as I explained what happened. "You just left her there," sighed Darling. "What? No, I didn't," I protested. She put up her hand. "No, you're right. I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm just nervous is all." I reached across the table to touch her hand and calm her. She recoiled and winced. "I'm sorry," I said. I know you wouldn't have done that. I'm upset and I'm being cruel," she admitted. "It's a bit of a reflex." "I'm sure she's all right," said Fink. Darling cocked her head sidelong to look at the older man. "You're right, I'm sure." Her teeth showed in a soft smile, and this time, it didn't feel quite so forced. "She's a tough cookie." And then she hid her face behind a glove, and I caught Fink's eye while she dabbed her eyes silently. The older man wanted to tell me something. He had another bit of information, I could feel it. He had said that he had trusted me. Whether that trust was misplaced, I couldn't say for sure, but I knew what that look meant. Darling drew Steve the dog up into her lap, and I excused myself to the kitchen area of the room, hoping to find some potato chips to snack on. This also proved to be a good moment for Fink to speak with me candidly. He leaned in with a whisper and I flinched, almost sent the bag of ruffles in my hands gliding through the air. "Hey." He continuously looked back over at Darling, who was beginning to nod off. Tears make you tired. That's something I've learned. "I know what you saw down there." "What? How do you mean?" I mean... He took in a big gulp of oxygen and began to explain to me. "That's an engine. It would explain all of these strange happenings that have been going on." "Excuse me." "Don't look at me like that." He paused and reached into my open bag of chips, crisping one between his teeth slowly, and then went on with his explanation. "I saw one once when I was much younger. Could hardly believe it myself." "What the heck is an engine?" He held up his hand and closed his eyes, searching for the right words. They were cryptid. I couldn't help it. At that very moment, I wanted to gasp out a laugh, but held it back. Please don't tell me you believe stuff like that. I believe in the ninja. I can't vouch for the things in this world I've not seen, but I have seen a ninja. They exist. I stood, mouth agape, and wiped my hands off of my pants, slipping back into my gloves and forgetting the bag of chips on the counter. I used to do a lot more work on boats. It was always more fun, I thought. Well, I ended up taking some work on a Japanese researching vessel. They had come up here and gathered data. It was a life experience, I'll tell you that much. You see, I always wanted to be a pirate when I was a kid, so I figured working on a boat was about as close as I could get in the modern age. He grinned, hoping the joke had landed. It didn't. He huffed and grumbled, returning to his story. I was hired as a consultant of sorts, as I was already well seasoned at this point. I aided in mapping out the subaquatic terrain. We would check out different areas at different times in the year. Well, he stroked his peppered beard. There was this one time in the middle of the night, and all the Japanese fellows were making fun of me because I was calling bumkiss on the folklore of the ninja. Totally bogus, I thought. And then I catch a glimpse of a man standing out there in that melting ice. The only problem is, it's not a man. I start losing my mind, screaming at my crewmates, telling them that we've got a man overboard. They ignore my screams, so I take over one of these spotlights on the port side and turn it over to look at the thing out on the ice. So? I asked. So, it was a ninja, he shrugged. They're troublemakers or bad omens, gremlins, but instead of planes, they hang out in the Arctic and F with fishermen, Inuit communities, people like us secluded from the rest of the world. You're crazy. Fink laughed and withdrew his flask, taking a sip and rubbing his hands together. Whatever you say. Just then, a tapping came on the door of the canteen, and every single dog in the room began whining low. The room felt colder as the candles went out. All hollow. I can't tell you how long we stood in the darkness like that. For time stopped having meaning there, and I was instead left to count these seconds in blinks. The sharp inhale of air coming from Fink next to me was audible, and then everything was silent. Even the dogs dared not make a sound in those moments. My stomach dropped into the floor, and I waited for the next bit of noise to come. And then Darling spoke. Hello? It came from feet away and forced a spit to catch in my throat. I felt her hands come out and touch my arm, and I jumped. It's me, she said. Fink, Andrew. Her voice was small. I answered with a crack in my voice. I'm here. Andy, thank God. I felt the hand clench on my arm harder. Fink coughed as if to bring some normalcy back to the nature of our circumstances. I'm here. The older gentleman's voice was stern, gruff. I could hear the vague noise of him shuffling through his pockets. Still, the tapping on the canteen door rang through the open room. And then came a voice from the other side. Hello? Help! It was Jones. Jen, hushed Darling. She was beginning to really dig into my arm. Hello? Help! Darling let go of me and started to move. I squinted through the blackness to make out the watercolor outline of her shadow to grab onto her, so she could not go to the door. She attempted to jerk away from my grasp, but I was stalwart in my hold. I could feel her move in the dark to look at me, so I held a finger to my lips. It took a second for me to realize how futile that was, so I spoke. That's not Jones. What the heck do you mean? She asked. Fink clicked his light on, and we were bathed in the small glow of it, and Darlene's eyes were panicked and pleading. I let go of her. "Listen," I said. "That thing is not Jones. Whoever is on the other side of that door, it's not good news for any of us. That's the thing or person or whatever that we ran into deeper in the facility. It sounds just like her." Darlene's eyes shot to the door once more. "Andrew's right," said Fink. "Whatever's out there is not human." I caught myself rolling my eyes. "I don't know about all that, but we can't trust the person on the other side of that door." There was a pregnant silence among us in the canteen before Darlene approached the door leading out into the hallway. She put a flat hand against its metal surface. "Jen?" she called. "Amber, please help me. I think there's something out here with me. It keeps moving around in the dark and I don't know where it is. Come out here with me." Darlene's eyes darted back to me and Fink. There was a questioning look in her face. We both shook our heads. She turned to the door. "Why don't you just come in? It's not like the door's locked. You could just come in. There's no reason for me to come out there." A shrill bit of laughter rang from the other side of the door, and I recognized the mocking voice of the thing I had met deeper in the facility. As the chill played my spine like a xylophone, I knew that Fink was probably right. That was no human. "You stupid. I'll kill you," it said. Darlene stepped away from the door and crossed the room to stand next to us. And then it was back to Jones's sweet lover's voice. "Please, come out." Another echoing laughter that rang through the otherwise silent room, like an echoing insanity. Darlene twisted around to look at me and Fink. "Do you think it got her?" I opened my mouth to say something along the lines of, "That's likely," but Fink placed a hand on my shoulder. "Nah," he said. "I'm sure she's fine. It's like you said. She's a tough cookie." "Yeah," I said. The tapping slowed against the canteen door, and we moved a bench table against the door. It eventually ceased altogether. The cold was cutting straight through us, even in our many layers. Darlene's teeth chattered. My gloved fingers were stiff as wood, and Fink kept sniffing. The stink of his flask began to swarm my nostrils, and although it was pungent, I considered it a welcome distraction from the very real perils that faced us. I took it upon myself to begin distributing unopened kibble to the dogs. They greedily ate it up, and even as the temperature dropped, the mood began to feel a little less dire. I turtled my arms and head into my layers and swathed myself in a wool blanket, sitting on a pillow and surrounding myself with a few lit candles in what was once our dining area. Fink came over to sit by me, and his cheeks were rosy from more than just the cold. As much as I liked the man, his drinking was beginning to bother me. We should be staying clear-headed and aware of our surroundings. I was idly aware of Darlene rummaging around in the cabinets. "Bingo!" she shouted as she returned to meet us in the dining area. In one hand, she carried a spray canister, and in the other, she held a lighter. "Whoa there," I choked. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm going out there." She was shaking, but I got the strange impression that it wasn't from the cold. She was working herself up to do something. Something big. Something dangerous. Something stupid. "No, you're not." I was surprised at my own voice coming out so callous and rigid. "There's only 3 of us left, and you want to go out and make it 2. Are you insane?" "I'm not insane. I'm not going to let that thing take over," she said. "Comms are down, the power's out. Crap has full-on hit the fan in case you've not noticed. We don't know when the blizzard will pass, but I do know that no one's coming for us. We have to fight back or we're as good as dead." "Fink." I twisted around to see the older man dead asleep. He was snoring. I was hoping that he would aid me in talking Darling down. So much for that. I turned to look back at Darling, but she was heading towards the door, sliding the bench table away from the entrance. Before I knew it, I was up on my feet and moving fast towards her. I reached out to grab her, and her hand shot out, slapping me away. "Hey," I said. "What? You want to just hole up in here and wait for that thing to freeze us out? How long do you think we can wait around to die, huh? The only chance we've got is to get Jen and make our way out to the chopper. That's the only hope for us now." "What about Donovan?" I asked. "Well, him too." She gritted her teeth. "No reason to leave him behind either, I guess." She flicked the lighter on and whipped the door open, readying the canister out in front of her stiffly. "You can come along, or you can die here. I don't care anymore." She wasn't going to listen to reason. I could see it in the glassy reflection of her wild eyes with the dim lighter flame. She disappeared down the dark hallway leading deeper into the facility. "Crap," I whispered. I looked at Fink and sidled over to him, shaking him. What?" said Fink, startled and swinging. "Darling's gone." He started pulling himself to his feet, pushing off the wall. "What are you talking about?" I could hear his knees give off 2 pops as he went. "Where'd she get off to?" He wiped at his sleepy eyes. "We've got to go get her. She's off her rocker." I was getting more panicked by the second. "She's gone and she's going to get herself killed." "Let's go." He staggered toward the door and blurry steps. As we entered the dark hallway, Steve, the curly-haired mutt, stuck his nose into the crack as we went to close the door to the canteen. I hunkered down and patted him across the back of his ears. "I'll be right back, buddy." He whined but tucked his tail in and wandered to lay with the other dogs. The door shut and Fink shone his light left and right. "What way did she go?" "Deeper." I pointed into the dark. He sniffled and we began walking. Fink carried a flashlight and I held a battery lantern out in front of me. It seemed that as we went, the light ate up the shrouding darkness ahead, and I felt that the place would swallow us up without hesitation if it were given the inclination to do so. Neither one of us spoke. We simply waited to run into whatever in God's name waited for us in the dark. A sharp yell came from somewhere in front of us. A man's scream. My blood ran cold, and as I glanced at Fink, I could see that he was just as bothered by the sound as I was. Our pace accelerated, and in no time at all, we came across Donovan sitting in the hallway. "It freaking hurts," hissed Donovan. It took me a moment to realize what was the matter. He wasn't wearing his glasses. They were strewn to his feet. "That crazy lady tried to kill me." I hunkered down as Fink kept a lookout. "What happened? Where have you been?" "Those things. They look just like us." "What's that mean?" I looked at his face and he jerked it to the side. The whole right side of his face was bubbled and blistered. "What the?" he yelled at me. "Back off." The last traces of warmth in my body ran into my feet. He was holding a pistol in his hand. I put up my hands. "Hey, Don, there's no reason for you to be waving that around, alright?" Fink interjected. "Put the gun down." Keeping us in his one good eye, he scrambled to replace the glasses onto his face. I could see they were cracked. "How do I know you're not one of those things?" Fink was shouting. "How do we know you're not?" "You two just stay right there and don't make a move." I wagered a response. "What happened to your face? Did one of those things get you?" Donovan chuckled sickly. "No, it's her, Darling. 1 minute I'm running from you guys and the next, I slam into her in the dark. Guess she thought I was one of those things." He tested a prod against the blister on the right side of his face with his free hand. It nearly blinded me. Fink spoke. You were running from us. Yeah, you guys were chasing me. It seemed no matter how many rounds I emptied into your bodies, you just kept coming. That wasn't us, I said. Donovan looked us over, no doubt studying our clothes for traces of bullet holes. No crap. Do you believe we're really us? I asked. Fat chance I believe anything anymore. He sounded hoarse. His voice caught in his throat. If he had been a weaker man, this would have been the moment he broke into tears. He kept his resolve while his gun wavered until he finally let it sink into his lap. I guess you guys are who you say you are. There was a pause. Besides, he threw the gun into the shadows. I'm out of bullets, so I guess if you want to kill me, you should do it now. We're not going to kill you, said Fink. Well then give me a hand. I reached down and helped Donovan to his feet. Even if he wasn't my favorite person in the world, it felt good to be in a trio again. And he had had combat experience. We continued our venture with me in front, Donovan in the middle, and Fink bringing up the rear. What do you think those things are? Asked Don. Ninjins, said Fink. I was willing to believe anything. That's just human in Japanese, said Don. Those things are doppelgangers. You haven't seen nothing till you catch yourself running around in the dark. You saw yourself, I asked. That's right, he said. Saw you and Fink too. How many? I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Let me show you guys something. Don took the lead and we slowly made our way into the infirmary. As we shut the door behind us and began to shine our lights around the room, it was obvious the bodies of our team members had disappeared. Those things weren't our team members. Donovan said the obvious aloud. We kicked the blankets they had been wrapped in and opted to exit the hallway. Don grabbed a hacksaw off one of the tables on our way out, and I slipped a hammer into my pocket. Fink stayed quiet. I didn't want to accidentally kill anyone, but Don seemed to have no problem wielding the saw out in front of him. I wasn't sure how much damage something like that could even do if he got the chance. It's freaking cold. I tried pulling my scarf up to cover my mouth and nose. No crap, said Don. We took the small set of stairs leading into the underground storage. We passed by jerry cans, instruments, and excess food stored on shelves. As we passed by a shelving unit of dry kibble, we heard a rattling from behind it. We stopped and pivoted to shine our lights at the thing that must have been back there. All was dead quiet as we watched and waited. Nothing showed itself. Just as I relaxed my shoulders, that hissing, mocking voice of one of those creatures belted out the words, "It's cold. It's so cold." And the shelving unit was shoved by some unseen force. I dove out of the way, scrambling past Don. Don sidestepped it. Fink let out a wailing cry as the shelving unit pinned him. I twisted around, trying to shove my frozen hand into my pocket to withdraw the hammer that I had placed there. I heard the pitter-patter of the creature's feet. It was darting among us in the dark. "I'll get you!" screamed Don like a madman. He too disappeared into the shadows, giving chase to the creature. I heard his hard boots disappear somewhere towards the stairs that had brought us down there. He was gone. I moved on hands and knees with the hammer dangling limply in my right hand. As I met the overturned shelving unit, I heard Fink trying to pull himself from beneath it. "That's smart," said the older man. I stood, trying to prop the shelving unit back onto its feet. After tilting the bent metal at an awkward angle, it seemed like it would stand properly. I reached down and tried lifting Fink to his feet by slipping an arm beneath his armpit. "Are you all right?" I whispered. The shriek of a woman echoed through the facility. That was something to worry about after we regrouped. "I think so." His breath came out in a great white puff. I don't think anything's broken, but I can already feel my ankle swelling up. That's alright. I reached down to lift my lantern. You can lean on me. Let's go back upstairs. The movement was slow with Fink, forced to shuffle his feet in small steps. We made our way to the landing of the stairs and stepped into the mouth of the main hall. I could just barely see the outline of something ahead. It looked like a person crouched in the center of the hallway. I called out to the kneeling figure on approach. "Donovan, is that you?" The figure didn't move. "Darling, Jones." No movement. Fink tried. "Hey." We approached slowly, and as the light met the scene properly, I choked back my vomit at the smell. I knew what it was. Blood. It was like copper in the air. It seemed the figure was hard at work, pumping its arm. The sound of wet crunching met my ears. Donovan twisted around, still on his knees, and held up the severed head of junior researcher Jennifer Jones. "I got one of them," he said. "Christ," said Fink. Me and Fink stood in the hallway, looking at Don crouched over the twitching body of Jones. An infinity of silence stretched between us. Don wore a wicked smile, and for the first time, I understood the possibilities that polar madness could offer. "What have you done?" That was Fink. My words were still caught somewhere in the back of my throat. I was hyper-focused on the dead face of my friend. "What are you talking about?" asked Don. "I got one of those little things. Look at it." He stood and offered the head of Jones out for us to see more closely. "I don't think that's one of them," I spoke. "Look at it," said Don. There was a long pause before he let the severed head thump to his feet. "I know what's going on here." His words were soft, lingering, insane. "I'm the only real one left, aren't I?" He cocked his head to the side, as though he was waiting for a response. "You need to calm down," said Fink. "You've already killed one of us." He motioned to the dead body. "Look, snap out of it." Don took a step towards us, forcing a flinch out of me. I did not want to be anywhere near him. "Don't come any closer," I said. "Why?" said Don. "If you're the real you, you shouldn't have any issues being near me." I could see in his eyes that he had already made up his mind. He didn't think we were real. "Just back up, Don," I said. "Please, don't come any closer." "Just let me get a good look at you," he responded. "I want to make sure you're all human." He took another step forward. "I'm serious, stay away from us," I said. I wasn't sure if I would be able to fight him off, with Fink leaning on me, so I shifted around to hand my lantern off to the older man. I'd be able to whack him with the hammer if it seriously came down to it. I didn't want it to come to that. Don moved quickly, charging at us. Without any other options, I shoved Fink off my shoulder so that he bounced off the wall and fell to the floor. Don came straight for me, wielding his hacksaw in his right hand. His left hand came out from my throat. I swung the hammer and it met his groping left hand. He let out a howl and swung the hacksaw at me. If he were able to grapple me, I was sure his superior strength would win out. I ducked, feeling the hacksaw catch on my hood. Without thinking, and only the driving force of adrenaline pumping through my muscles, I swung the hammer at his knee as hard as I could. It made a god-awful crunch and he spun like a wild ballerina, falling and sliding down the stairs to the basement. I shimmied away from the landing of the stairs and found Fink still holding onto the lantern. We ran from the scene like we were a three-legged race. All the while, Don screamed at us. His words echoed off the metal walls. "You can't leave me down here. They'll kill me." We stepped around the body of Jones. Her blood pooled thickly around the spot where her head should have been. As Don's screams fell away into the distance, we slammed into the door of the canteen, huffing and out of breath. I shoved at the door. I could hear something inside of the canteen. Shuffling feet could be heard as something or someone approached the other side of the door. The door swung open, leaving me and Fink to go flailing into the room, landing on our knees. The door slammed shut behind us. Looking around, I saw in the dim candlelight that the dogs were still there. Good. I twisted to see who it was who had shut the door. It was Jones. She was grinning. Next to her was Darling, and as I whipped my head around to the kitchen area, I saw Donovan munching on a snack cake. I moved to settle Fink onto a mess of blankets and stood. "Thanks," he said, but as I caught his eyes, I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. How was any of this possible? I stood by Fink, pushing my back to the wall. "Are you alright?" asked Darling, hunkering down to check Fink's ankle. "I think so," said Fink. "Probably need to ice it." He seemed to think this was funny because it was followed by a sick laugh. "What about you?" asked Jones. She was looking at me. "Are you okay?" She looked genuinely worried. What a master of infiltration those things must be. I almost believed it myself. Either way, I knew what she meant. I was shaking. As I looked down to my hands, they were quivering. The hammer that I held was splattered in Don's blood. At least I thought it was his blood. My eyes darted back to Don, standing on the opposite side of the room. "I'm good." I watched them all, bug-eyed. It felt that at any moment, the creatures would spring into action. The wait was the worst part. Darling pushed Fink's pant leg up, exposing a red angle that would inevitably purple over. "Why don't you put that thing down?" said Don, stepping over to inspect me. He was talking about my hammer. "I really don't want to," I said. "You're among friends here. There's no reason for that," he responded. "You know what? I'm good, actually." I looked him over, hoping that there was some small thing that I could latch onto, and noticed that it would give away the fact that he was in fact a doppelganger. "Come on." Don stepped over to reach for the hammer. I jerked it away. His face bunched up. "Quit acting like a crazy person." "Leave Andrew alone," said Darling. Don winced at this and stepped away. "Fine. I guess I'm always the bad guy." I choked out the words. "Last time I saw you, you were all burnt up." "Me?" said Donovan. "Really? Is that so?" "Yes. I threw you down the basement steps, so excuse me if I think you might not be who you say you are." I shifted to look at Jones. "And the last time that I saw you, you had no head." Jones looked at me with a stunned expression. "Really? You don't trust me?" Darling was watching me. I could feel her eyes penetrating me. "There's gotta be some sort of test, right?" she said. "There's always a test in the movies." "This isn't a movie," said Fink. The room went still except for the dogs. Steve, the curly-haired mutt, came over to stand near me. It felt good to have him nearby. If I could trust anyone, it felt like it was man's best friend, right? I pet him as Fink massaged his ankle. The other three people in the room took up on one of the bench tables near the kitchen, talking amongst themselves. Fink took one last swig from his flask and tossed it across the room, forcing the dogs to perk up their ears at the strange hollow metallic noise. "Empty," he grumbled. "This is bad, Andy." He whispered to me, "How are we supposed to know who's who?" "No idea," he said. "Well, if they're really an engine," I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of my mouth. "There should be some sort of test like Darling said, right?" "Heck if I know," He shrugged. I'm not a cryptid zoologist. The tension in the room was swelling, and as the other three came over to sit near us, I could feel the pounding on my heartbeat to my ears. An idea sprang to mind. Hey, Jones, I said. Yeah, she asked. What's this dog's name? I asked while pointing to Steve. That's Steve. A million thoughts ran through my head. Think of something. What's the capital of the United States? Washington, D.C. What's my favorite color? I asked. How am I supposed to know that? You never told me that. I guess not. Darlene sprang into action. Andrew, calm down, alright? Jen is who she says she is. How can you tell that? I said. The only person that I can vouch for without a doubt is Fink over here. He's been with me the entire time. I could see the spark in Darlene's eyes. She was getting upset. How do we know you two aren't the fakes? Hey, said Don. Yeah, how do we know that you are who you say you are? Fantastic question, said Fink. No idea, he chuckled. You better kill us now. I wanted to reach over and throttle the senior researcher. We're real, I pleaded. A moment of silence. Since when did you two get so buddy-buddy? I asked while wiggling my finger between Darlene and Don. Jones interjected. Now is not the time to start pointing fingers at each other. I think we're safe in here. You shouldn't have a freaking head. I was shaking. I saw Don saw your freaking head off. Jones glanced at Don. Is that right? Don laughed hysterically. What? Why the heck would I do something like that? I don't know, said Darlene. You do strike me as the type that would fly off the handle given the chance. Oh, screw off. Don crossed his arms. I don't know what vendetta you've got against veterans, but that needs to stop. You were in the military? Asked Jones. Well, yeah, said Don. The next words came out of his mouth very slowly. You know that. Everyone backed away from Jones, creating a semicircle around her. Darlene was looking at her lover with wild skepticism. What? Said Jones, attempting to give a wiry smile. All eyes were on her. I'll be damned, said Fink. Good try. Darlene spoke with an edge to her words. Where did I grow up? Jones seemed to mull the question over. Darlene lifted her spray canister and flicked her lighter on. What town did I grow up in, Jen? The cracking sadness in her voice was immeasurable. Please, said Jones. You know me. I love you. Blinding fire shot on a line from Darlene to Jones. I shielded my eyes with a forearm and could barely make out Donovan and the commotion as he stumbled away. Jones's vocal cords ripped through the room, and the dogs began barking. The smell of crackling flesh filled the room, and then came the smoke. I love you, screeched Jones. She threw open the door to the canteen, and the bellowing smoke went with her. She was a human torch. We stepped into the hallway, watching her run towards the entrance of the facility. She disappeared out of sight, and her screams became echoes as we shut the door to the canteen once more. Darlene was crying silently. Don sat on one of the tabletops, watching his hands. I moved to Darlene. I'm so sorry, I said. Shut up. Her voice was sharp. Just leave me alone, Andrew. We have to make a run for the chopper now, said Don. I regretfully agreed. He's right. I leaned against the wall near Fink. I don't think I can fly in this storm, said Darlene from a million miles away. We've got to try, said Don. Why don't you try shutting your mouth, said Darlene. Hey, I'm sorry, okay, said Don. But there are still people here that we can save. You're the pilot and we need you. A long sigh fell out of Darlene as her shoulders slumped. All right, okay. Fink tried sliding up the wall so that he could stand appropriately. He still favored his injured ankle. If we're going, I need to grab something from my room. Are you kidding me? Said Don. There are more important things to worry about than some trinket from your better days, old man. Fink glared, stone cold sober. It's my wife's wedding ring. I didn't know you were married, I said. Fink closed his eyes. She's been dead for some time. Well, I'm not going with you, and I don't assume you'll be able to make it there on your own with that ankle of yours, said Don. I studied Don's face. He seemed like the real deal, but after what had happened to Jones, I can't say I knew anything for sure anymore. The next words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. I'll go with you, Fink. Thank you. He wobbled over near me. I think I can manage to walk on my own, just barely. Gotta be careful with us all. So that means we're splitting up again, said Don. He clapped. Fantastic idea, great. Thanks a lot for that one. It might be faster if we do, said Fink. Yeah, said Don. It might also get a lot more confusing too. Me and Don will make sure the line leading out to the chopper is still intact. Darling shot me a look. Just be quick. I don't want to lose anyone else if we can help it. And what if you're one of those things? Asked Don. Darling shrugged. What if you are? We set out, me and Fink heading deeper into the facility. Before leaving the canteen door, I watched Don and Darling go until I couldn't see them anymore. Let's go. Thank you, Andrew, said Fink. It means a lot. Don't worry about it. It was slow going with Fink keeping the weight off his ankle by keeping a gloved hand on the wall. We passed by the spot that we had initially found Don sitting in, the place he had been burned. My mind flashed to those two out in the blizzard, and I hoped like mad that neither one of them were doppelgangers. My foot met something in the dark and I leaned down to see what it was. Fink stopped, holding the lantern up high so as to illuminate the immediate area. It was the pistol the possibly Doppel Don had dropped. I lifted it to my face and inspected it. It was still fully loaded. So that Don had lied about the gun. It made me feel a little bit better about crippling his knee. I slipped the hammer into my pocket and aimed the gun ahead. I didn't care anymore. If anything came out of the dark, I would fire immediately. We met the part of the hallway where the bunk rooms were, and as we came upon Fink's, I told him to keep a lookout while I opened the door. A sick feeling in the pit of my stomach swelled and I couldn't figure out why. Something wasn't right. I swung the door in and the lantern light spilled into the bunk room. My scream caught. I couldn't say anything. There was someone sitting at Fink's desk adjacent his bed. Hey! I screamed at the figure sitting there. Don't move, I've got a gun on you. It did not move. I approached carefully and rounded its shoulders so that I could see its face. It was Anthony Finkel, lead researcher. He was cold to the touch and a small line of frozen blood had pooled around his temples. I whipped my head around to see Fink standing in the doorway. His figure was blotted out by the light he held in his outstretched hand, but I could see that his shadowy form didn't need the assistance of a wall anymore. His ankle was fine. Not you, I cried out. He threw the battery-powered lantern directly into my face and it met my forehead just as I squeezed the trigger of the pistol in my hand. Fink let out a groan, but before I knew it, he was straddling me and I was on the floor. The dead Fink toppled out of the chair in our struggle. The living Fink brought his knee to meet me directly in the groin, and I tried slipping the gun beneath his chin. He grabbed the barrel, pointing it directly at the ceiling. I squeezed the trigger 2 more times, and the room was coated in a mesmerizing disco flash as his free hand began finding my throat. Tears pooled in my eyes. I couldn't breathe. I was going lightheaded, and my vision began to pinhole. In one last, desperate hope, I reached into my pocket. The hammer met his head, and he rolled off me. I scrambled to where the door was, pointing the gun at the threshold. I could barely make out his outline in the low light of the strewn lantern. As he approached the doorway, I fired the gun until I couldn't anymore. The shot rang in my ears and I could hear nothing. I watched as he tumbled to the floor. I ran towards the entrance, throwing the gun as I went. I held the hammer, readying it so that if anything came from the shadows, I would immediately smash its head in. I tipped over a solid object and I heard the thing let out a whimper. I reared the hammer back as I waited for the thing to find me in the pitch black. A warm tongue met my face. I relaxed and scratched Steve around his ear. The dogs. We had totally forgotten about the dogs. Come on, boy, stay close. I took my steps more deliberately, feeling along the wall until I saw the open door of the canteen ahead. Some small candle glow came from there, and I ran towards it in a mad gamble. Upon meeting the threshold, I saw the canteen was empty. Crap, I said. Steve stayed close behind. Maybe we could come back for the other dogs. I dashed towards the entrance and it felt good to hear the paws of Steve behind. Upon climbing the stairs to the entrance, I passed by a blackened figure. That must have been the fake Jones's body. I ignored it, and as the light coming from the windows of the entrance illuminated my surroundings, I felt a bit better. With only the thoughts of survival in my mind, I threw the door open and barreled into the blizzard once more, keeping my hold on Steve's collar. I could hardly see a thing, but I found the line leading out to the chopper. I moved, keeping one hand on the dog and the other on the line. The snow blindness was overwhelming, but I would be damned if I didn't keep a hard grip on that line. Just over the sound of the whipping snow, I heard Steve barking wildly. I looked at him and saw that he had buried his snout in the snow. I leaned on close, searching for the thing that he had found in the snow, and saw the frozen face of Donovan staring up at me. He had been sheared clean in two across his waist. There was no time to mourn. I could feel the heat of the cold attempting to trick me, and I pulled Steve along with me. I'm sure I was choking him, but I did not want to leave him. I did not want to be alone. Through the wind of the storm, I saw the outline of the chopper. I picked up my speed, lifting my legs to fight against the gathered snow. Everything burned. I slapped against the door of the helicopter and felt around to find the handle. I tore it open, dropping my hammer somewhere. Steve dove into the cabin as I fought with the wind to keep the door open. I followed the dog and the storm slammed shut behind me. Darlene was sitting in the pilot's chair. You made it. There was a small bit of elation in her voice. She looked at me puzzled. Where's Fink? He is one of them, I said, exasperated, trying to catch my breath. The cold forced a cough out of me, and I could barely stop hacking. Did you see Don on your way? I lost him somewhere out there. She nodded to the white, hellish landscape. I nodded manically. He was half buried in the snow. I think they got him. She began flipping knobs. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think they cut the gas line. She fell back in her chair before slapping the steering console in front of her. Come on, can't one thing just go right? I shook my head and focused on the dog attempting to bury its snout in between my legs. Darlene looked at me. You are you, aren't you? I think so. I scratched Steve's head, trying to distract myself from exactly how screwed we were. Are you? Probably, she chortled. Screw this. She pounded the steering console again, but peeked up as she looked out the windshield of the helicopter. I followed her eyeline. You see that out there? She squinted. and leaned forward without breaking her gaze from what she was looking at. I did, but to be certain, I wiped the frost gathered around the windows and pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands. There was a semicircle of humanoid figures standing in the blizzard, unmoving.